please ask that you stand for prayers by the Reverend Harold Thomas before we start the meeting? Thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you. Could everybody be seated? Okay, before we begin properly, I'll read through the usual notices. I'd like to remind you all that this council meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so we are all on camera. So please be aware you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. This meeting is available to view online now and in the future, whenever and wherever people wish to view it. There is no need, therefore, for any other filming of the meeting to take place. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. However, I've had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. I'd like to welcome everybody attending and anybody watching the meeting via the webcast. However, can I ask that all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put onto silent. If there is an emergency alarm, please follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic Car Park. If we have any motions or amendments during the meeting, I will need them to be clear, please, before we go to the votes. Okay, so agenda item 1 is attendance. The attendance register is going around the room, so can everybody please sign it and pass it on. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence. Have we had any apologies, please?
Yes, apologies have been received from Councillor Hugh Bevan, Leonard Constance and Councillor Stuart Evans.
Members, do we know of any other apologies? No. In that case, then we'll go on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Is there any advice for members, please?
Thank you, Presiding Member. Yes, there are some members who have a personal and prejudicial interest in relation to agenda item number 15, which relates to the pay policy statement, as they have close personal associates who work for the local authority and therefore will be leaving the room when the item is being discussed. They are Councillor Giles Davis, who has a sister and a niece who works for the authority. Councillors Alan Slade and Sue Malsom have a son, each working for the authority. Councillor Neil Waite and Councillor Ray Williams both have a daughter who works for the authority. Councillor Chris Tew, whose wife works for the authority, and Councillor Cathy Evans has a close friend who works for the authority. If I could ask those members to confirm that interest. Thank you. Also, with regard to that item, all officers will be required to leave the room when it's being discussed. I would, however, ask that members agree that Jason Lewis, the Head of Strategic HR and Asset Management, be given permission to remain to answer any queries members may have, and that Jacqueline Tranter remains to take the minutes, and that Chris Slade remains to operate the webcast. If I could ask members to agree that. I'm not aware of any other issues.
Okay. Members, do you have any other interests to declare that come to mind? If not, just remember as usual to write them in on the form as well as declare. Before we go any further, I just want to mention that an item in relation to SRS severance costs has been added to the agenda after item number 14. I am satisfied that this matter should be considered as an urgent item in accordance with paragraph 4.27.12 of the Constitution, as a decision is needed by the end of the financial year to enable the SRS to achieve the level of savings agreed with partners. And you should have had the papers, and they went out on email as well. Okay. Agenda item 4 then, we're looking at the minutes of the last meeting. Can anybody move that those minutes are correct? Yep, are we all agreed? Thank you, members. Agenda item 5 then, update on actions. These are updates on what has been done to implement our previous decisions. Are there any comments or questions about them? If not, then are we all happy to note those updates? Yeah, brilliant. Item 6, receipt of petitions. We haven't had any, so we'll move on to item 7, which is public question time. Again, no public questions. So, agenda item 8, announcements. Leader, do you have any announcements, please?
Thank you, Presiding Member. First of all, I'd just like to associate myself and all other members with the respect that we've given to the family of Stuart Greenwell as a former officer of this authority and someone who was, from what I hear, much respected and much valued. We pass on our best wishes to his family at this sad time. Secondly, I'd like to welcome the fact that Torvine's again been praised as the best council in Wales for paying out discretionary housing payments. Shelter Company's Waste Not Want Not campaign aims to raise awareness of DHPs, which are an important source of financial help for people struggling with their rent. The money is given to Welsh councils every year by the UK Government, and it's up to us to give the money out to the people who need it. But if the money isn't spent by the end of the year, the UK Government takes it back and we get less the following year. So it's good that we've spent all our allocation and are in fact topping it up. DHPs are meant to help people who can't afford the cost of their rent. Councils can award a DHP payment, for example, if someone's affected by the bedroom tax or benefits cap. For thousands of people in Wales, DHPs are all that stand between them and homelessness. In Torvine, our total DHP budget from the Government is £340,533 for the 18-19 financial year. As of the 1st of January, we had spent £415,818, but have agreed to continue to top up the pot to help people in need. This hasn't happened by accident, but because of our councillors making the choice to top up the fund to help people in need to try and avoid homelessness. So thank you very much. The Shelter Company website also contains details of how to apply for the fund, or you can ask your local councillor.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Chief Executive, do you have any announcements, please?
No, thank you, Madam. Oh, sorry, you said Madam Presiding Member.
Thank you. Okay, we're looking at agenda item 9 then, which is the budget and medium-term financial plan. Can I ask Nigel Aurelius to present the report for us, please?
Thank you, Presiding Member. I'm going to briefly introduce the budget, its construct and conclusion, together with then some commentary as your Finance Director, considering our overall financial standing, financial prospects going forward, and then going to hand over to the Leader, who will deal with the policy direction of the budget. This is the 13th budget I presented to Torfaen Council, which is quite a number to have delivered. It's a third of my 40 years working, actually. However, I know I say this every year, with the continued contraction in public sector funding, setting a balanced budget gets harder and harder. Whilst the overall settlements this year are marginally better, the cumulative effect is significant. It continues to be the most challenging time for public services and their finances ever. In real terms, our funding is below what it was before this period started, and is certainly well short of what is needed to simply stand still, let alone improve public services. I have no desire to set a pessimistic tone or one that lacks ambition. I'm just reflecting the financial realities all local authorities face in setting budgets. It's not just a Torfaen or this council issue. It's difficult without a real terms increase in funding when the demand for complexity of, and indeed scrutiny of, our services continue to grow. Whilst we always look for efficiencies and will endeavour to do more for less, you cannot avoid the fact that such a sustained reduction in public sector funding necessitates very difficult choices. And we cannot ignore the difficult choices. We have to set a balanced budget, and hiding behind any excessive use of reserves to put off those choices is not something that I would allow as your Finance Director or recommend. Our general fund balance could only support around 7 days of spending power on recurring spend. So unfortunately we have to make the difficult decisions and live within the funding envelope we have, however much we collectively won't like it. That does not mean we should not press our case both as an individual council and a local government community for adequate funding, particularly for social care from the Welsh Government. And as I will come on to later, there was positive movement in funding between the provisional and final settlements as a direct result of some of that lobbying. Financial assistance and support for social care at the community level and aimed at early intervention and prevention would undoubtedly assist the NHS in Wales. And I personally think it's more important than ever that we press the case for funding to be seen through a lens of the broader health system rather than the narrower health service. Turning now to the budget for 2019-20, in your council papers you have, starting on page 29, the overall covering report on the budget. This includes the statutory recommendations. I'll come back to those. You then have the budget report as at Appendix 1. That has 4 annexes: final mitigations, the full budget book, service planning change activities, and the updated medium-term financial plan. There are then 6 more appendices, including property bandings, council tax band, wellbeing assessment, asset management plan, environment policy, and the capital strategy and prudential indicators. I do apologise for the overall length of the document, but setting a budget now seems much more complex than it was when I did my first. I'll come back to the covering report and the formal recommendations, but now briefly go through the budget book report and annexes, which start on page 41 of your agenda. The first part of that report basically takes you through the journey of the budget, including the provisional and final settlements, our initial first draft gap, the proposed full mitigations to ensure a balanced position, and the recommendations from scrutiny and the final proposals. Council will see from the report that we continue to only receive single-year settlements, despite indications each year from the Welsh Government that they would consider multi-year settlements. I do appreciate the difficulties the Welsh Government face in terms of providing forward indications, especially at the current time with the UK spending review and other matters challenging the Government. That said, I'm expected to provide with you as a council with a forward forecast on which you can plan, and in some ways I'm doing that in a little bit of a vacuum. And it certainly doesn't seem to chime with the spirit of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. There is commentary in paragraph 5.3 outlining the scrutiny recommendations and the response from the Executive in respect of those, all of which have been accepted. For completeness, I've also included the full list of comments that were made at the same time, and all these are being addressed. In summary, we received a small cash uplift over 2018-19, close to 600,000, or 0.45%, 54%, which was up from the provisional settlement, which was only a 0.1% like-for-like increase. We had some extra grant funding, particularly for social care, and reference to further regional funds being available. And we ended up with a final requirement of £3.5 million of mitigations required. The mitigations in full are listed in the relevant annex and are a mixture of efficiencies, restructures, grant assumptions and service provision change. This latter element has the most direct impact on citizens. The overall approach for the budget for 1920 has again been focused on delivering protecting investment in corporate plan priorities of educational attainment, protecting the vulnerable and maintaining a greener and cleaner borough. The next section of the report then takes you through our service planning, in particular the change activities. I think the 2019-20 budget has seen us bring service and financial planning much closer together than ever before in this Council, and the scrutiny session on the 17th of January combined both the budget and service and finance activities together. The annex contains the full detail of the change activities. The report then goes on to update on the medium-term financial plan, and the most significant issue to draw to Council's attention is that we're now anticipating financial challenges over the period to 23-24 to be around £19.5 million, inclusive of school pressures. Apart from the policy steer around domiciliary care, which we've had from Cabinet, this forecast is simply about standing still. I've assumed that in terms of Welsh Government funding, this will remain at a cash flat line, and that assumption obviously falls well short of any real terms increase. In terms of funding the forecast, this will be through annual efficiency reductions, fundamentally challenging where we spend our money, the potential for capital investment to reduce revenue, as well as the T22 programme. In terms of T22, this is currently being sharply refocused and will be essential in allowing the Council to make some sensible choices. However, T22 will not solve the whole financial challenge, and although that's about transformation, the choices it will ask of Council will not all be benign. The report then goes on to briefly outline some risks, and the most significant is the assumption of funding in relation to the UK Government's decision around the employer's cost of the teacher's pension and its unaffordability without funding. The fire levy has the same issue. Our reserves policy comes next, together with the current position around the levels of reserves. The policy remains unchanged, but members will see that our overall levels are falling and will fall further with the likely financial outturn for 2018-19. The current year has been a difficult one, and I will have to explore options as I close the accounts to improve the reserves position. It's imperative that there is no repeat in 1920, as that would have a material impact on our financial standing. The final part of the report is our capital strategy and programme. Whilst it continues to have 21st century schools as a focus, the announcement from the Welsh Government contained new capital monies and changes to funding intervention rates, which also release some resource. This gives the potential for a refreshed approach to a capital programme, which we have not had for some time. The key messages within the report on page 41 summarise the position. A challenging budget and service and financial plan, one that continues to invest in or protects priority areas, assumes £3.5 million of budget mitigations, that the lobbying that was done between the provisional and the final did yield a better settlement than was originally, a budget that doesn't draw heavily on recurrent reserves to balance recurring spend, service and financial planning being brought closer together, a medium-term financial challenge, and our increased capital resources, so enabling the development of a member-led capital strategy. Turning back now to the covering report, which starts on page 29, paragraph 5 of that report takes members through the council tax information based upon an increase for Torfaen of 5.95%. Our Band D would stand at £1,315.49 if that is approved, which represents an increase of £73.88 over 1819. The report and appendices then update on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and public awareness, our workforce plan, our asset management plan, which is also in an annex, our procurement strategy, and the capital strategy and prudential indicators. We have the environment policy for approval. We then have the section on our capital strategy and prudential indicators within Appendix 7, giving the full details. The Audit Committee has already considered the capital strategy report prior to it coming to Council for approval, as is usually the case. In an earlier part of the report, paragraph 4.1, I detail my professional responsibility in terms of reporting on the adequacy of the budget, adequacy of reserves and contingency plans. The report and papers discharge that responsibility, and I've already commented on the level of reserves and that we cannot erode them further. I've also outlined the key risks within the budget, particularly around the pensions, employers, increase in respect of teachers and fire. The formal recommendations start on page 37, are in 4 parts. I'll be asking you to approve the budget, the statutory recommendations around the budget and council tax, updates on the supporting plans and the capital strategy and prudential indicators. As is the case when the budget concludes, I'd like to put on record some thanks. Firstly to Dave Lilly and his colleagues. Dave is sitting in the chamber under the screen. Without whose support and professionalism I wouldn't have a budget to present to members or for members to consider. All my colleague chief officers and their teams for their support in once again developing this budget. It continues to get more difficult each year, and so their support is very much appreciated, and collective responsibility and discipline remains a real strength of this organisation. Lynn Williams and her colleagues in respect of the overview and scrutiny of the budget and service financial planning. In respect of this latter point, I believe the scrutiny process and the workshop style approach continues to be a strength and improves every year. The meeting in January once again had plenty of vibrancy and real challenge, and again has had an influence on the final proposals. Thank you, Presiding Member. I understand the Leader would now wish to make a statement, and after that I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Leader Van.
Thank you, and thank you, Nigel, and all the officers and members who have worked hard on the budget this year. Particular thanks go to Dave Lilly, his team, and the officers in each department who have worked on savings and on the process of shaping them into something we could take forward. Thank you to the Cabinet members who have worked so hard on ensuring that proposals follow our priorities as much as possible in these tough times, and to scrutiny members for your input, especially during the marathon session you spent looking through the mitigation proposals in a cross-party and collegiate way. I'm pleased this is a process which has improved every year, thanks to the input of members and the guidance of Lynn Williams and her team. There's always improvement to be made, but our budget scrutiny process has real impact now, which is real progress from when I was first a member. This year, I'm glad we've been able to take on board the recommendations of joint scrutiny in the constructive spirit they were intended. Moving to the budget in itself, I'll start with some stark statistics to give members some important context. We are now moving into the 10th year of austerity, which is unprecedented. Each year, the elastic band of public service funding is pulled ever tighter, and making savings whilst maintaining services gets harder each time. In Torvine alone, we now have almost £25 million less to spend on local public services than if our RSG settlement funding had increased in line with inflation since 2010, £25 million. Now just imagine the difference that £25 million would make to our schools, to vital services like social care for vulnerable people, for housing, for efforts to work for a cleaner, greener Torvine. Just imagine the difference it would make to our ability to keep council tax bills down. That would be huge. But continued cuts upon cuts is the reality faced by councils across Britain in 2019 thanks to austerity. As the funding of services reaches breaking point, just keeping the show on the road is becoming no mean feat. So my message is twofold. Firstly, this is not just a Torvine problem of Torvine councils making, but a problem faced by councils of all persuasions across Britain thanks to the impact of austerity. There are no easy answers, no hidden ways out of the mess that's been created by decisions at a UK level, the ramifications of which are left for us councils to deal with. And secondly, my message is that austerity simply must end soon if public services as we know them and love them are to be saved. Now, that doesn't mean smoke and mirrors pronouncements from the dispatch box at Westminster. That means real funding decisions to properly fund vital public services, including the ones provided by councils. However, in setting the budget today, we have to deal with the world as it is, not the world as we want it to be. As an administration, we have to roll up our sleeves and make the best of a difficult situation, like the other council administrations will have to do. And in that context, I'm proud of a budget which puts key services first at such a difficult time. Despite the budget pressures, this budget gives more money for our schools, around £750,000 extra. Now, that won't make their budget setting easy, but at least Torvine schools won't have to deal with cash cuts to their budgets like in other areas. I'm proud that our budget continues to safeguard the services that our most vulnerable people rely on. Social care funding is the crux of any budget. Take too much away and risk an unsafe service for the most vulnerable. Don't seek sufficient efficiencies and the rest of the budget risks being decimated. Now, this budget seeks to strike the right balance on behalf of those who need this service most. I'm also proud that we've been able to avoid closures in areas like libraries and avoid potentially damaging savings in areas like winter maintenance, cleaning and greening. I'm proud that delivering this budget will help us continue the way on issues like discretionary housing payments, the Armed Forces Covenant, young care leavers council tax exemptions and removing fees on child burials, all of which were adopted by Torvine early and are now being followed as examples of best practice nationally. As well as on discretionary housing payments, I'm proud that this budget will protect our commitment to combating poverty crisis and our commitment to early intervention and prevention, including supporting those who are being transferred onto universal credit. This budget and the approach you have taken as members shows we're doing our best to be a compassionate council, even at such a difficult time. At this point, I'd like to say a word about our staff, who are genuine local heroes. They go above and beyond the call of duty to deliver a plethora of services in our schools, in social care, in housing, in our communities and in our neighbourhoods. They help people young and old, never seeking the limelight, but doing their best to make a difference. Local government workers often get an unfairly bad press, far too often, but I'm proud of the work they do, and I'm proud that this budget will continue to enable them to do their jobs, all whilst being paid at least a foundation living wage, as we recognise the necessity and the wisdom of being a decent employer. On the subject of staff, I'm also proud of the work we're doing towards in-housing some key services. I believe public services are best delivered by public servants, rather than by chasing the quick buck of outsourcing to the private sector. As previous reports have mentioned, we're working to bring back in-house key domiciliary services, including enablement and dementia services. We're also working to reduce reliance on agency staff in other areas. The decision each council has to make about council tax rates is sometimes seen in isolation, when of course it's just part of the budget equation all councils have to balance. Now, setting council tax is never an easy decision. Striking the right balance is difficult. All councillors want to keep council tax as low as possible for hard-pressed residents, but we also want to maintain the vital services and not plunge them over the edge into unviability, as has been diced with in some council areas recently. We believe the rise this year, whilst higher than we would have liked, strikes this balance, and that a decision to do otherwise would have risked the long-term future of key services, damaged our communities, and resulted in more widespread redundancies of key workers. It's important to note that we're not alone in our assessment on council tax. Councils of all political persuasions have been forced to raise council tax, including independent, Plaid and Conservative-run councils. Indeed, our council tax rise comes in below the average percentage increase in Wales. So we'll try and work hard to keep bills down as we go forwards, but the ball is very much in the UK Government's court. Unfortunately, rising council tax bills are inevitable when central government continues to make funding cuts to vital local services, as councils are forced to bridge the gap somehow. We will continue to seek efficiencies, collaborations, joint services and restructures. We will continue to look at how we can do things differently or make other savings to reduce the pressure. But anyone advocating a council tax freeze this year alone would have to find nearly £2.5 million of extra cuts. And if council tax had been frozen since 2010, we'd have nearly £16 million further cuts to make this year alone. Further cuts of such a scale would mean that key services, including schools and social care for the vulnerable, would be decimated. We cannot have our cake and eat it. To pretend we could freeze council tax when our settlements are reducing in real terms without damaging services is irresponsible, a false choice and an impossible promise. But if austerity ended, we could have settlements that merely kept up with inflation that would make such a difference to council services and to council tax. So I recommend this budget to the Chamber. This is the reality of responsible governance led by values of compassion and protecting public services whilst operating in a climate of cuts to our funding. Not offering impossible promises or false choices, instead digging in, rolling up our sleeves and doing our best to safeguard services and protect people from the worst impacts of austerity.
Okay, thank you. Members, questions, comments?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. Can I first of all thank Nigel and Steve for an excellent, comprehensive report, and can I thank the leader for the information he's given us. He says a lot about austerity, but can I start off by explaining that the Welsh Government's resource budget has increased by £485 million this year. £485 million. And can I just inform members that the Welsh Assembly Government reserve stands at £325 million. £325 million. So why is the Welsh Assembly Government not passing that money on to local authorities? I'll tell you why. Because they just wasted £9.3 million on flawed initial funding for the Circuit of Wales. Well, that went really well, didn't it? All right? They spent £15 million on undersold RIFW land. £135 million on the delays of delivering the M4 Relief Road. £44 million on the inquiry into the M4 Relief Road that not 1 inch of tarmac has yet been laid. £51 million on delays and overspend of the A465 Head to the Valleys Road. £4 million on loans to the Bad Wolf, that's the Pinewood Studios. £400,000 per year to keep the Pinewood Studios going, and not one film has yet been made. And I'll just finish on £39 million on timber sales for NRW without following the proper tendering processes, and just to capitalise it all, £3 million recently written off for student grants given in error. Members, we don't have the money, and we are being asked to ask our residents to pay a further 5.9% increase on the council tax bill because of the financial incompetence and the financial mismanagement of the Welsh Assembly Government. Last year, Leader, if you remember, I asked you to go back to the Welsh Assembly Government and say, we're not satisfied with the allocation of money, and can you do it again? So once again, this year, I say to you as Leader, Anthony, please go back to the Welsh Assembly and say we are not satisfied, we will not put up with this financial mismanagement and waste of the Labour-controlled Welsh Assembly Government. And I'll leave it there.
Come back in now, or
Do you want me to come back in at the end? Is that better?
if I put it out to members, would you like Anthony to come back one-on-one, or yeah? If that's okay, Anthony, because I haven't had any other requests. So.
I'm already on. Right, a number of issues there. Yes, Welsh Government money has increased in cash terms this year. However, it's still decreased by around £1 billion since 2010 in real terms. So, yeah, we have been making the argument for more money from Welsh Government. The settlement has improved more this year between draft and final than it has before. But the idea that they're somehow rolling in cash just isn't true, especially when they've got the burden of the NHS to deal with, which, takes up a larger percentage each year of the Welsh bloc. But it's an issue we lobby hard on across different political persuasions. I lobby alongside Peter Fox from Monmouthshire and Plaid leaders as well, and independent leaders to try and get more money into local government, to emphasise it's not more money for local government, it's more money for services like social care and schools. So that's a point we'll make very keenly. On the reserve, we have to be careful with that one, because that's an accusation that's levelled at us as councils as well. But of course, reserves are one-off money. They can't be used to underpin revenue, as Nigel said in his speech today, because once they're gone, they're gone. And Welsh Government will make the same arguments back to us that we've been making to Welsh Government in the past. I'm glad he recognises that this is a problem across Wales. Monmouthshire's council tax rise as a Conservative-led authority is 5.95% as well, as are authorities across Wales. The average is actually higher than ours. But that shows that it's a problem faced by us in common. What I would say, though, is if we're criticising the Welsh Government, look over the border into England, and the situation faced by councils there is even more severe. They've had even more of their funding cut from them. So I don't, for a second, wake up any day of the week and say, I blame the Welsh Government for this, because if the Welsh Government didn't exist, I fully believe that our situation as councils would be even worse.
Thank you. We've got members who have a few indications. Okay. We start with Romanette.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate Councillor Mills and thanking Nigel and all his team. We know the hard work and the difficulties you've been going through this last year. And as Councillor Mills said about the Welsh Government and the millions of surplus there, but we also have to look at the wider picture as well about the Conservative Government bringing this country to its knees, and they cut back all the subsidies to all the councils, and I feel it's disappointing that we have to go to 5.95 at the moment. With the austerity times we're in, I won't be able to support this because of that reason. And I've also asked for a review of third sector grants, which a few have been cut and some haven't. And I can't accept anything until this has been done fairly across the board. And looking into the third sector grants, as I said, the whole country is in the state we know. But it's good that we can look at it prospectively as groups, but there is a Conservative Government bringing the country to its knees. Then we have the Welsh Government as well, with their cutbacks to us. And I feel very disappointed that we're in the state of we have, but until we look at the third sector grants as well, which I feel haven't been dealt with fairly across the board, I won't be able to accept this budget at all.
Okay, Peter Jones.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I just wanted to remind my Conservative colleague of some of the things he forgot to mention on his list. They've been in power now in Whitehall for 9 years. The first thing they did when they came into power was give every millionaire in this country a 40,000 tax rise. Then we had the disaster of the bedroom tax, and I've seen the impact of that on disabled people. Then, an even worse disaster, the disaster of universal credit. We're all dealing with that problem, and if we don't raise this council tax, our most vulnerable people will have to suffer even more because of that horrendous thing. And finally, we're seeing a huge rise in food banks. This is a difficult time. Let's put the blame where it really lies, with the Conservatives in Whitehall. Thank you.
Rob Kemp.
Thank you. As the Assistant Chief Executive for Resources said, if like, and in regarding the cross-cutting scrutiny in regarding the budget, it works at the end of the day. But my thought is basically we can only scrutinise the areas which basically have come to us. And now the fact that it is a cross-party as well, I'm going to look at the leader to see if we had more cross-party say before the cross-cutting scrutiny took place. Maybe we can actually find out more additional ways to save the council, if like, before it comes to the cross-cutting resource committee. If you like, that's all. It's just a general statement.
Janet next.
Thanks, Nigel, and your team for producing this budget, but I really cannot accept this 5.9% increase in community tax. I think it will have a devastating effect on those already living in poverty, and I feel it would pull more people into that particular area. I also agree with Councillor Councillor Bennett, I apologise, regarding the third sector voluntary cuts. I would like to ask if this council can defer the decisions on that until a full review has been taken right across the board.
If Dave's can come back to you on that.
On the third sector grants, the major grants pot, that isn't actually affecting any third sector organisation. The majority of the saving is coming from Torfaen Play, so in there's a bit of an anomaly in there. It's Welsh language provision that was originally delivered by Menti Iaith, but which passed on to Torfaen Play. We've engaged with Torfaen Play about it, and they've said that they can absorb that pressure. So thankfully this year, the savings that we're making from the third sector grants pot is actually quite manageable, and all these other organisations in there that are largely delivering towards an anti-austerity agenda, anti-poverty agenda, sorry, are unaffected, and I'm quite pleased about that. So I would urge you not to vote against the budget on that basis, at least.
Jason?
Yeah, thank you. Leader made an interesting statement to say that all councillors want to keep tax as low as possible, which is interesting. Can you confirm the year in which council tax was not raised last?
Mike's got no one else at the moment, so...
I'll take those points in reverse order then. Well, council tax has to go up just to keep pace with inflation. So, like with any tax, the ingenuity of national politicians is that income tax goes up even if it doesn't go up, because as the economy grows, more money comes in, whereas council tax has to be put up to keep pace with inflation, if nothing else. On top of that, of course, is the growing demand for our services and everything else. I repeat my point from earlier that we'd have £16 million less to spend if we hadn't risen council tax this decade. £16 million this year alone would make a devastating difference to the services we run. So, yes, all councillors do want to keep council tax as low as possible, but all councillors also want to run viable local services. If I really thought we'd be doing people a favour by freezing council tax, with the consequence that would have on local services, then I would do it, but I don't, because I believe that would be a disaster. Janet Jones, on the point you make about impact of council tax on people in poverty, yeah, again, that's something we have to be aware of. There's something that balances our decision what to do with council tax. I would say that council tax reduction scheme is available. In Wales, unlike in England, that is still a 100% scheme, so people who are genuinely struggling with council tax bills should approach our revenue and benefits team or approach their local councillor and see if they're eligible for help. But again, I would say that we would be able to keep council tax lower if only there was more money available to fund public services. Unfortunately, as national government pulls out of funding local services more and more, the hole inevitably has to be partly filled by council tax, because we can only make so many savings a year without the services that people rely on falling over. So that's particularly emphatic because of the gearing system of council tax, especially in areas like ours that aren't too affluent. For every 1% less we get in our settlement, we have to raise council tax by 4% to fill the same gap. So that's a 4-to-1 gearing effect. So if our settlement was in line with inflation even, and I'm not asking the earth, we're not asking for a settlement in line with the pressures that we face or in line with previous decades, just a real terms flat settlement, we'd be able to freeze council tax and have money left over. Again, that would be a choice for councillors what they wanted to do. On the point that Councillor Kemp makes, I'm glad he praises the scrutiny system. Scrutiny are always able to ask officers and members for other ways that they want to scrutinise the process. Officers are always open to that conversation, as they're open to any conversations that you wish to have at any point of the year about the budget. So I'd encourage members to approach us if they've got any ideas or suggestions about how that process could be improved further. It's something that we've tried to improve every year as we've gone forward, and I believe it's light years away from where it was, where it used to just be a set piece, hour and a half in the council where people made speeches. Now it's a chance to have a bit of backwards and forwards, and to actually get under the skin of issues. But if you believe it could be improved further, I'm open to that conversation. Peter Jones, thank you for the point you make. None of us want to raise council tax, but we realise the impact on vulnerable people if we don't. And if I can just say, many of the issues you pointed out increase the pressure on councils. The bedroom tax, universal credit, the rise in food banks, the rise in poverty crisis as a whole pushes more people into the arms of the services that we provide as councils. So if we fail to provide those services viably going forwards, those people will suffer a sort of a double whammy because of government policies that have had a negative impact on them. I believe Councillor Daniels has answered Councillor Burnett's point about third sector grants. On the point he makes about a reserve, I think we need to be clear here. A reserve is a one-off pot of money that can't be used again. It's different from a budget surplus. If there was a budget surplus, we could argue for that to be put into revenue straight away. But a reserve, just as we would argue if the Welsh Government tell us to spend more reserve, and they wouldn't because our reserves are very modest and low, we'd say that money can only be spent once. It can only fund services for 7 days, I think Nigel said. So the Welsh Government reserve can't be used to plug a gap in the revenue budgets that they face.
Okay, I've got Jason again first.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps needed to clarify my question slightly. But before I do, I'm glad that you recognise that Torfaen is not an affluent area. But surely the answer to that isn't to take more money out of people's pockets. That's a ridiculous thing to say. You've said you're not asking for the earth in the settlement, and perhaps that's the problem. We're not going into these negotiations with Welsh Assembly with an open mind to try and get as much money as we can out of them. What we're going into seems to be a pre-agreed settlement where we know we're going to come out with our tails tucked between our legs. Torfaen has a pussycat negotiating for us where we need a dragon. You've gone in, you've rolled over, had your belly tickled and been kicked back out the door again. And it's the people of Torfaen who are suffering as a result. So can I recommend next time you go in to negotiate with Welsh Assembly, you take somebody with you who's got a bit of backbone and perhaps they can do the negotiating for you. So I will rephrase my question. My question is therefore, when was the last time Torfaen did not raise the council tax above the rate of inflation?
Okay, Nicholas Jones.
I don't know whether the leader perhaps wants to come back on that particular point first, because I'll expand that a little bit further in a moment, if that's okay.
Well, the last time that council tax wasn't raised above inflation, I can't recall the exact date of that, but again our pressures rise above inflation. Of course the inflation rate changes every year, so I'm more than happy to try and get an answer to that question in writing. But I do have to say, some of your questions are puerile in the extreme. I don't go in as a leader of Torfaen to ask for more money from the Welsh Government. I go in with my Welsh Government colleagues, Welsh local government colleagues of all political persuasions. And, you know, those colleagues have between them, you know, decades of experience in running councils and negotiating settlements. And I really do not believe for a second that if we went in there and shouted and screamed and stomped our feet, that we would get even as much as we've got this year. And that's a judgment that's been made from councillors across the political spectrum. So we don't go in as pussycats. What we do go in with is a clear strategy of how to try and argue for more money for local services. But again, I say, the Welsh Government are not in the land of milk and honey. Their budget has gone down by £1 billion in real terms over the past decade, thanks to austerity from the UK Government. And I really think it's a bit rich for a Conservative councillor, if that's what you now are, to come here and lecture me about the impact of austerity on not affluent areas. I know we're a not affluent area. That means the people in our area rely more on public services. And if you really think it would be healthy or good for them to have a council that pulls the rug from under them and withdraws services from them when they need it the most, then I'm sorry, we're going to have to agree to disagree. But if you really want to look at the real cause of rising council tax and rising demand in key services that people rely on, then you want to go and speak to your Prime Minister.
Thank Can I have Nicholas Jones next then? I'm going to come back to them.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, on that point, Leader, that leads in quite nicely, actually, because the whole point of this is really that we are discussing perhaps a Conservative government which has been in power for 10 years against a Labour government in Wales that has been in power for 20 years. Leader quite rightly points out that this isn't only a problem in Torfaen, but it's a problem generally across Wales. If we want to look at the background of this, the settlement in Wales has gone up on an increasing basis. It is above the settlement that is received in England, but yet we still see above English rises in council tax. If we're to believe the papers at the moment, the average rise in England is going to be 4.5% in England, whereas the average rise in Wales is going to be close to above 6%. I think this points more about the way that money is spent and the wastage that Councillor Mills has quite rightly pointed out within the Welsh budget, and likewise my Conservative colleague to my right has pointed out with regards to the spending and our ability to go and ask for the Welsh Government for that money, which is, quite frankly, it is there and just not asked for. Now, my question is really around the fact that during his presentation he said that the settlement was up, there's extra funding grants, T22 is likely to be refocused, but yet we're still seeing an extra 1.5% rise in council tax. So I fail to see, and perhaps the leader could explain to the residents of Torfaen, why, if our settlement appears to be on the up, why the council tax rise also needs to be on the up. It's a sizable amount of money. It's an extra, £660,000 on my calculation. But I also understand that we're spending an extra £750,000 in schools. When I understand that part of the amalgamation of schools was to actually save some money, it seems to be costing us an awful lot more. Maybe the leader might pass some comment on those points, please.
I'll come in at member's preference. I'll take your points in order. Yeah, Tory government in power 10 years, Labour government in power in Wales for 20 years. However, the macroeconomic levers that at the end of the day dictate the amount of money to spend on public services are held in Whitehall, and that's the issue here. You say it's a problem across Wales, it's a problem across the UK. Councils in Wales have lost around a quarter of their funding in real terms since the beginning of the decade. Councils in England have lost near a third when you try and take a like-for-like basis. So it's a problem faced by councils across the UK, not just across Wales. You talk about the rises in council tax England compared to Wales. This is where percentages start to get a little bit misleading. The average council tax rise in England is £72. The council tax rise in Torfaen works out at £73. So there's a pound difference there. So because the base level of council tax in England is higher, a smaller percentage rise brings in a bigger cash rise. So it's just trying to deal with it on a sensible basis like that. Percentages are often used because they're an easy headline, but actually the reality is sometimes a bit different. I'm glad you recognise the average rise in Wales is higher than ours in Torfaen. That's because we have tried our best to try and keep it down as much as we can, despite our wish to try and preserve local services. But again, on the lobbying point you make, if you'd like me to supply to members some of the lobbying documents and a record of the meetings that the WLGA had with Welsh Government to lobby for extra money, I'm more than happy to do that. Because it wasn't just a case of giving us what we asked for. We had several meetings with the then First Minister and his ministers across a 6-month period to lobby for more money for local services. We used best practice from Scotland and England with some of the infographics and some of the cases that we've made to both ministers and to backbench assembly members as well to argue for more money for local services. I believe we're beginning to be listened to, but the insidious position they find themselves in is I believe at devolution 1999, I think 38% of the Welsh Block grant was spent on the health service. That's now up around 50%. And as that money goes up and up and up, the amount of money less for everything else goes down. And you say that their settlement is up. It's up in cash terms, but again, it's down by about £1 billion in real terms when you look at the effect of inflation since 2010. To be fair to them, they would argue that their settlement isn't on the up. In the same way that I'm now going to argue in response to your point, our settlement isn't on the up. It may have marginally gone up in cash terms, but in real terms, it's still a big cut. And that doesn't even take into account the pressures on local services above and beyond the rate of inflation. We've got pressures on services because of rising demand. There's pay pressures in the system this year as well, which is something that's not been the case in previous years, all of which we have to fund from, an extra £500,000 on a budget of £175 million, a gross budget of more than £200 million. So it's not fair to say our budget is on the up, because in real terms it's decreasing. The more money for schools, of course the main driver in schools is the amount of children they have to educate, and our rolls are going up at the moment this year, aren't they, if I recall rightly. So we're trying to give them more money to educate children as best as we can. We've put the money up in schools because we believe it's a priority, and I hope he would agree with that, because if we hadn't have put the money up, you may have seen reports from elsewhere in Wales across the weekend of the impact on employment in our schools. If we weren't to give schools extra cash, I believe we would see a large number of redundancies of some of the teaching and support staff that have helped move our schools forward in recent years. So that's why we've put extra money in schools, and I hope he welcomes that.
Bring in Nigel a moment.
Thank you. I don't want to jump into any kind of political debate, but just some technical points just to sort of emphasise what the leader was saying. I mean, RPI and notional inflation, really isn't the biggest driver in terms of our cost base. Our cost base is driven by pay and demand for services. Demand within children's services will easily outstrip inflation every year, just simply based on numbers. And in terms of, if you think about pay, 1% of pay for non-schools is about £500,000, 1% of pay for schools is about £500,000, and our overall settlement only went up by £500,000. So I think when we look at what money we get and the cost drivers on us, they're much more around pay and demand than they are in terms of what's ever happening with pay inflation in the wider economy.
Dave Daniels next.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I do take exception to being lectured by the Tories on funding our public services, because we've been dealing with the fallout of austerity for the past decade. The 7 years that I've been on this council, I joined the council with the intention of investing in public services and helping people. I've spent the past 7 years having to decide how to cut and having to raise council tax, something I never wished to do. But all of this is not detached from what goes on in Westminster. We deal with wave after wave of austerity cut, of welfare reform change, of various different cuts that impact on the most vulnerable, disabled people, women. It really, really feels like the Tory party have got a real problem with the poorest in our society. And it's just galling to hear you talk about investing in public services, because you've just withdrawn from them for the past decade, and we've had to pick up the burden of that. Universal credit was raised by Peter, and that's a perfect example. I personally have seen examples of cancer sufferers, domestic abuse survivors, homeless people, rough sleepers, who had suffered under the universal credit because of some ill-thought-out stipulations. The waiting list, the fact that if you're paid twice in 1 year, 1 month, then you don't get paid the next month. If you've... I could go on, sorry. But we're dealing with that. And we got £1,020 for the administration cost from the DWP locally. That was all that cost. That was all that covered the universal credit. Locally, we've invested hundreds of thousands of pounds into sort of mitigating the impact of that. And over the past 7 years that I've been in post, I know that we've been investing much, much more than that in picking up the pieces that you guys have left, quite frankly. And I find it galling. And I find it galling that you object to council tax every single year, yet you don't come up with an alternative. As of today, you haven't spoken to the Chief Finance Officer with any alternative, any way of moving forward. We've got £2.5 million that we need to save, and you've come up with nothing to... No, it isn't rubbish. Well, if you have got an alternative to that £2.5 million that we need to save this year, and the £19.5 million that we need to save in the years going forward, then bring them forward. But it never came up in the scrutiny process, and it's far too late to go through that process now. It's just, you must realise that at this point, if you're objecting to something, you have to come up with an alternative. It's not good enough. We're in a responsible position. We're having to do something we definitely do not want to do. All of my colleagues around here see the impact of Tory austerity, and they would do the complete opposite if we had the chance. So, yeah, I just find it galling.
Excellent. I got Dave yet. I'm not sure if you were indicating or just turning around.
I was, but Councillor Daniels has talked.
Okay.
I will add something. It's interesting to hear the comments from the opposition, and by the opposition it is chiefly the Tories on the front bench. Jason, I've always considered your contributions to be measured and clear, but I never thought that they were predicated on bravado, because this comment about spinelessness going into the debating chamber is just that, bravado. What the leader has done in conjunction with other leaders right across the political spectrum in Wales is to have a meaningful debate with those who have the money to see what we can squeeze out of them. And these debates are heated. We have regular feedbacks from Anthony, and I can assure you that the level of debate, the level of negotiation, the talent that is on display there as well, I'm sure that you would find it incredibly difficult, anybody in your team, to match that. As of Nicholas, again, measured contributions, and I've always admired the way that you conduct yourself in the chamber, but this notion that comparing and contrasting the 10 years of Westminster government and 20 years of the Welsh Assembly government, you're absolutely right, that is the case, and I hope it goes on for another 20 or 30 years as well, and I hope that the 10 years tenure of office of the Tories is short-lived. The big difference between the 10 years of the Tories and the 20 years of the Assembly government is, of course, that the Tories hold the purse strings, and that is the absolute fact of it. What we get in the Welsh Assembly is, in the main, what comes down from Westminster. One final point, I did want to elaborate on the point that Dave Daniels referred to, but I think it was sufficient for him to comment on the fact that whilst the door was open for all members of the opposition to make a contribution to the construction of the budget, if you like, through talking to Nigel and his team, and I'm sure, I don't know, Nigel, if you can confirm that any of the opposition have brought any kind of ideas to you in this process.
But yeah, can I ask so we don't sort of bring opposition and ask for
one final point. I would say this, that I know there's a bit of banter, and I'm sure that Jason can take it in his stride about whether or not he's an independent or a Tory, or his reasons for jumping from the Tories, or rather the independents, to the Tories. I wouldn't comment on that. It's just a spectator sport as far as we're concerned. But the real acid test will be in 3 years' time, when the electorate that voted Jason in as an independent on the basis of his avowed independence will have to have another...
Okay, let's not get too personal. We don't want something. Right. Okay, right, I got Jason next, but just bear in mind, let's not get bogged down in being personal.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm glad members find taking money from Torfaen residents so entertaining. I don't, personally. I think it's a travesty. But ultimately, we're not in power. We don't set council tax rates for Torfaen. If you'd like some ideas on how to avoid them, more than happy to give them at any time.
Why didn't you do it in the scrutiny process? That's exactly the time to do it.
Come on. Only through the chair.
You know, as much as an exception as you take from getting lectured from Tories, I take exception to being lectured by people who've never had a job in their life. I don't know what it is to go out and work for a living. So, I'll come on to a question, if I can.
Right, there's questions or comments, please, about this budget.
My question is, can you confirm the current debt position of the Council and the plan to take us out of that debt?
In order, because otherwise it will spiral. So, I got Nicholas next.
Sorry, I thought maybe there'd be an answer to Jason's question.
We're going to take a couple and then come back, because otherwise we just won't get through. Okay.
Well, I do think it is quite relevant, actually, because I have a different point.
Okay, if I take a couple of others then, because there's going to be different points, and then we'll come back. On Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. What Councillor Daniel said earlier. I'll just say one thing, though, before I start. I see Councillor Yola hasn't learned any lessons. There's membership here, I look around the room, and anybody in this room would be naive to think that anybody else could submit an alternative budget. As I said, I've spoken to Nigel on different things, and I'm sure if we all went in to put our own views over, he's got enough to do as it is, and said, you are the administration here, not us. We're here to challenge you. And I just look around and I said, any of you would be naive to think what has just been said, an alternative budget, what we could put on. And can I just say, why didn't you take the arm off the record? Because it's the same old story every year. The alternative. You know, we don't have the luxury that you do for an alternative. I'm sure if we all went to Nigel every other day, put our views in, the man's got enough to do. You, the administration, you are the ones that rubber stamp it. You are in charge.
Gwyn Jenkins, and then Kelly, and then we'll come back to Anthony.
I think if we spent more time discussing what we are here for today, rather than slagging each other off, right? Because to listen to it, I know I'm a new member, but I'm sat here and I just think I'm in a Muppet Show. Or whether you like that or not, you can take it. I'm not retracting that. I got elected nearly 2 years ago as an independent to serve my constituents. And I'll tell you something now. When people who know me will know I am Labour. I am Labour at heart. I've been brought up in a Labour house. And there's no way, before I get to my point, that I would ever cross the house. Never, ever. If I did, I would put up in Snatchwood and say, right, I'm going to go as Labour, I'm going to go as Conservative, you vote me in. Crossing the house is not in my willpower.
Let's not be too personal, member.
I'm not being personal. No. I'm not saying anything. I'm not pointing at anybody. I'm different to that. I don't just sit there and think I'm God and then got to go up before Mr. Ombudsman. The point I'm saying is this, right? Whether we like it or not, right? You can blame the Conservative government, you can blame the Labour. You have got the facts in front of you now. Do you think by discussing and slagging each other off, you're going to change that? We're not going to change it. Let's discuss it like gentlemen, ladies. Not slag each other off and say, you know, Conservatives this, Labour that. The reason I got voted as independent, I can get up here and say what I'm saying now. I am going to follow anybody. Right? I don't follow these here, I don't follow them, and I don't follow them on the front. I got my own mind. And I'm saying to you, there's people out there on the webcast that's looking at what you got in here and thinking, what the hell am I watching? You know what I mean? It's bad enough in the House of Parliament. They like Muppets screaming and shouting at each other and yeah, banging the bread. This is what we want. Is that what the people out there want? We discuss it, right? I haven't made my mind up how I'm going to vote, but you can't change it. We can all put our hands up and say, this side, we're not going to agree with it. You're going to agree that way. But Labour holds this council, it's going to get through anyway. Let's make constructive comments. Constructive, right? There's no way, like you said, nobody had been up to talk to him. None of us, including my fellow compatriots here. Right, that won't change until you get somebody different on the front there. Have an independent on it, have a Conservative in there. Let's have a mixture. But, you know, it's one party. One party. And unfortunately, that's the way it's ever going to be. And that's looking from an independent who is Labour at heart. But there's no way would I join the Labour Party, because at the end of the day, Snatchwood voting here is independent. I'm going to stay independent. I'm not saying what I'm going to do in 3 years' time. My mind is not made up. But at the end of the day, let's discuss what we got here. Otherwise, we'll be here till 10 o'clock tonight. Let's discuss what's on here. That's all I've got to say today.
Thank you. If we have Kelly first.
Sorry, I just wanted to calm things down a bit, really, and say, yeah, we're all here talking about a budget because we're looking to protect public services, and there's services, the services we seek to protect, maybe not always services that many of our residents see every day, but they're key services that protect some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. You know, we have a duty as a council to do all we can to safeguard those services such as social care, you know, and none of us came into this to raise council tax, none of us want to do that, but the reality is, if we don't agree this budget today, we've got to find £2.5 million from somewhere else. And where is that going to come from? I wouldn't be comfortable with that coming from social care or education. I really, really wouldn't. It's easy to sit here and argue, you know, it's easy, but it's not easy to come up with alternatives, and, you know, and that's because there's no easy answers left. That's why authorities, not just across Wales, but across the UK, are raising council tax. Authorities made up from all different political parties, different political makeups, coalitions, Tory, independent, whatever. They're doing that because there's no easy answers left to protect those services that our residents rely on. And that is why I'll be supporting today's budget.
I got the leader next.
If I take those points in order, I think Kelly's point is a pertinent one. There's often the easy thing to do in politics, and then there's the right thing to do in politics. The easy thing to do in politics in this situation would be to make cuts, laud a lower council tax rise, and then try and hide the consequences of that, because, as Kelly said, 90% of people don't have to use social care, for example, but the 10% who do would have their lives devastated if that service didn't run as we'd want it to. Because the money has to come from somewhere, and there are no easy answers. And, you know, to the people who don't see that service every day, we're lucky in many respects because we don't have to rely on it. But there are people who do and would have their lives devastated if we weren't to do what was right, if we were to choose what was easy instead. I think Councillor Jenkins makes some very fair points in what he says. I can assure you I spend 99% of my time trying to do the right thing, trying to get to grips with the budget situation as we find it, and I'll continue to do that, and I'll continue to try and engage with members in as collegiate way as I can. I sometimes get accused of being too nice. I sometimes get accused of being too softly spoken, but I'll continue to try and do that. I think the points made by Councillor O'Connor are more technical. But if I could just say, at one point this year, or late last year I think it was, I can't remember if it was before or after Christmas, I was accused of being a part of the gang of Oliver Twists, continually asking for more money and being a stuck record and being too insistent on trying to get more money from Welsh Government. In this chamber I'm being accused of not asking enough of Welsh Government. There's a middle ground that we have to strike, because whether we like it or not, the Welsh Government control the local government settlement. And whether they like it or not, their ability to do what they can do is controlled by how much money they get from their settlement. And so if we think that we would get more money from local government by going in there and slagging them off and throwing things around the room, hand me the equipment because I'll throw it around the room, it will get more money for us. But I genuinely do not think that approach would get more money for local government. I genuinely think that approach would just alienate ourselves from the Welsh Government and would result in less money coming into local government, not more. So the approach I take isn't because I don't like shouting and screaming at people, although I don't. It's because I don't think that approach is effective. So I'll continue to do what I think and what other leaders think, who are a huge collection of different personalities, from people who do like shouting and screaming to people who don't, from the left to the right. There's Plaid, there's independents, there's people of no party, people of parties, and we try and work collectively together to make that case, both to backbench assembly members, which I think is key, because I think that's where we can make more progress. One of the reasons that one of our own assembly members, Lynn Eagle, has been so vociferous in her support of local government and in trying to get more funding into local government is because I have an ongoing dialogue with her about the impacts that would have, the positive impacts of more money, the negative impacts of less money. And I think across local government, we need to speak more with our Assembly members so they know the challenges that we're facing in chambers like this. Because we are facing very difficult challenges, awful choices that none of us, as David Daniels says, got into politics to make. And I think there is a job of work to do so that national politicians understand that they can't just always hand down problems to local government and we can somehow solve them as if by magic. Their decisions have real consequences on a local level. And so I hope that's not it's not an attempt to be overly partisan, it's an attempt to try and be collegiate, but what I can't do is wish away the realities of the financial situation we face.
And we're going to bring Nigel in to answer Jason's question.
Just on the borrowing, the borrowing question. I mean, local authorities aren't allowed to borrow for short-term recurring spend, so your day-to-day revenue spending. So the only debt we have is around capital investment and capital acquisition. And the way the funding system works, we've essentially only got 4 ways of funding capital assets. One is capital grant from the Assembly in whatever form, capital receipts. They give us what is called a supported borrowing allocation, and we can use prudential borrowing. And our borrowing within our balance sheet is as a result of the supported allocation and our use of prudential borrowing. Within the papers you can see there's an authorised limit of £135 million and our maturity profile of debt is £123 million. Within our revenue budget are the repayments to repay that, but it's over a very, very long-term time horizon. Without borrowing, we wouldn't have a 21st century school programme or a capital programme. It's a slightly different connotation of borrowing than for a local authority.
I've got Nicholas now to come in.
Yes, thank you. I'm actually going to say something which may surprise the Chamber. Contrary to public belief, we on this side of the opposition are actually here to protect public services, and that is the whole point of it. The discussion that we have on a regular basis is just how that can be done. And some of my colleagues on this side have actually raised it. It would do Wales and particularly the residents of Torfaen a great favour if maybe we did have somebody else in the chamber having a go at doing that. But I will thank the leader on a very specific basis for pulling up some of the problems that we have got. And also a couple of his colleagues. Yes, it is true that there's been a Tory government in Westminster for 10 years, but in the 10 years prior to that, when we had a Labour government and a Labour government in Cardiff, I do understand that council tax still rose, and it still rose above inflation. So I don't think that this is a party political thing. I think this is purely down to the management of the economy in Wales, in Cardiff. And I think that probably that realisation amongst the wider general public is probably something which will feature very, very strongly over the next couple of years. I'd also like to just draw on this question of austerity. I wish people would talk about living within their means rather than austerity, because the two things are slightly different. So really sort of thankfully for that. But that's what I just wanted what we needed to do. And also the leader mentioned that a number of years ago, a smaller percentage of our spend within Welsh Government was on the NHS. And leader has quite rightly pointed out that that's another area of Welsh Government policy which is failing drastically. We're now spending 50% of our income on that basis. And this is still against the Whitehall settlement, which is higher here in Wales than it is in England, and the average rises in council taxes in England is lower. So I think it's not right to suggest that we don't want to protect public services. As my colleague has already said, what we really want to do is we want to stop the waste and the mismanagement in Cardiff, because that is the single biggest way that we as a council here will have more money to be able to spend on our residents here in Torfaen. That is the sad fact of the policies and the politics of here in Wales. That is what needs to change.
Okay, I've got Dave Daniels next.
The tempo is lowered, but I'm going to have to raise it, I'm afraid, because that phrase "living within their means" is one that gets my goat. Because I see, yes, I'll give you my definition. I'll give you my definition, and that is seeing a cancer sufferer who's just come out of hospital and had a stoma bag fitted, sleeping on cushions on the floor, sitting on a coffee table with a little doily draped on it as a cushion to watch telly, washing his clothes in a cold bath, eating hot meals from a cafe because he has nothing else to cook, and struggling to live on the pittance that he gets from the benefit system. That was one of the first cases I've seen. I'm quite emotional about this because that really hit me about what is going on out there. This is what we're talking about when we're saying living within our means. That is, you tell me and you say to that person directly, you need to live within your means. That man is suffering as a result of that kind of phrase. And this is what we're dealing with as a council. This is the shards that we're having to pick up with the services that we're choosing to invest in. And this is why I'm so protective. And it is a flipping hard thing to argue for, raising council tax, but I'll tell you why we argue for it. It goes towards funding the anti-poverty work that we do, and we do a hell of a lot. You know, we invested hundreds of thousands in bolstering our support services in advance of universal credit, and we had to, because I've seen case after case, and it's not exceptions, I've seen case after case of heartbreaking example where people have been left without money for a really prolonged period of time. We've introduced a hardship fund to step into that gap to make sure people have got beds, and if a fridge or freezer breaks down, they've got one. And that they can pay their heating and electric. We've got a financial inclusion team, which I'm fiercely protective of. They are fantastic at advising people out there, and if you don't know about them, please, I'll give you more information. They are supporting our most vulnerable through these tough times. We support, we've topped up the discretionary housing payment by nearly 100 grand already. We've got third sector organisations which we fund and support services. This money doesn't come from nowhere. We've chosen to do this locally because we're a Labour council. We have those values. We've chosen to do that. This is where that money, this is where that £2.5 million saving would come from. It doesn't come from nowhere. This is why we're so vociferous in asking for an alternative, because we desperately want an alternative. You know, it feels like a stuck record, and I agree, Ronnie, but this is how it has to be. I know we're the administration and we're responsible, but this is the hard lesson I've had to learn. For 7 years, I've been doing the opposite of what I want to do. We all have. But we have to do it, and we have to do it in the most Labour way possible, because there are people out there that need us. And this is why we ask for an alternative, and it's not a party political type thing. It is a genuine request, and this is why we've changed the scrutiny system to be how it is. If you remember when, back in the early days when I first joined, I can't say I was on scrutiny early on. That didn't suit me. This is a hell of a lot better, and the feedback from members would indicate that. And Jason, I mean, in terms of alternatives, you'll note that councils across the country of all hues, Kelly's made this point, are raising their council tax. Some from different parties higher than ours. It just goes to reflect the crap situation that we're in. We're in a really, really tough situation. And I'll finish on one point. I have had plenty of jobs before this. I will say that they've all been in retail. The vast majority have been in retail because that's all I could find. But that is the reality that's out there. And that has fed into my beliefs as a politician. It's why I joined a trade union. And I just, you know, I'm not going to take any issue with it, but this is where my values come from, seeing other people who've been struggling, and this is what drives me.
Yeah, right, Colette next.
About half an hour or so ago, Councillor Kemp made what I think is a very good suggestion. We all took part in the scrutiny session, but I do think that we can further improve that, and I think we could start our budget planning now. And I hear you say, Anthony, that that's up to members to discuss with scrutiny officers, but I do think you could take the lead in this, and we could start the budget planning now, go back to base, and build up the budget all members understand, because there are very difficult choices to be made, and the more we understand, the more likely we are to come together.
Okay, Cathy next.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I'd just like to correct me if I'm wrong, but there are no Welsh councils that have actually gone bust thus far, are there? So maybe we should be thanking the Welsh Assembly Government for keeping us out of the state that the English councils are in. So I didn't get elected. I didn't stand for election to raise council tax, but we're basically out of options here, aren't we? And this is what we need to do to protect our schools and social care and housing.
Members, for a moment, I was going to ask, could I have indulgence to speak as a member rather than the chair? Because obviously if I'd been sat there, I would have been bobbing. I just want to say, for me, it's not so much who's to blame, because, you know, that's something I'm going to be doing out on the street, wherever my own political views. For me, it's about what I got in front of me. Right now, I want to, you know, the situation is such that the best way to protect public services is to raise council tax, and it sucks. But, I mean, I'm going to struggle. As most of you probably know, I'm the only one in work, and I'm very glad I got a job. But it's going to be a struggle. But at the end of the day, if I didn't have that job, thankfully, council tax benefit would kick in, and I would be protected. And that's what we've got to think. You know, those of us who are lucky enough to have some spare cash, even if it's not enough, can help protect these services for those people who just can't. So, thank you, members, for just letting me say what I would have said. Okay, I'm going to have Anthony come in.
I'd like to thank you for that contribution, because I get, as you can probably imagine, as you all I'm sure do too, I get people come up to me in the pub or wherever and talk to me about council tax, council services, most of them polite. If you have the conversation with people, they do understand. They understand that if I was to tell them that they could not pay council tax and would still have services, that I would be lying to them. And if I always try and have an honest conversation with people and say, look, the dilemma I face is between having enough money to run really vital local services that you might not need yourself, but that people genuinely rely on to live their lives, and the level of council tax. And it's a balancing act, like anything else in their personal lives. It's a balancing act. In their personal financing lives as well, it's a balancing act. And people understand that. So it might be that conversation is more awkward than if I just turned around to them and said, yeah, go on, blooming council, putting the tax up, nothing to do with me, Gov. But you can have that conversation, and they will understand, and because people do understand, people aren't silly, they get that we have to fund the services that they value and they rely on, and that people rely on, and we can't do that by continually freezing council tax. The point about living within their means, I don't have to rely on Marx to respond to that. Keynes said quite emphatically that the budget of a government, the budget of a council, is not like a personal budget, because you create as well as spend. And so, look, at times of difficulty like this, sometimes you have to invest more in services in order to save in the long term and to build the economy up in the long term. We could probably save money by giving people less support who are on universal credit, or people who are going through poverty crisis. In the short term, we could save money by doing that. But in the long term, it would cost in terms of their lives and the impact on their lives. And it would also cost in terms of, in the long run, there'd be more demand on services. So we believe in the short term, we have to make a difficult choice in order to protect public services and to protect the long term. The point you make about the NHS, yeah, it's a source of frustration. The Future Generations Act, which Nigel and others have referred to this morning, should direct the Welsh Government to spend more on preventative services. We are the key providers of preventative services in Wales. We provide social care, housing, education, community services, and so that will continue to be a key part of the argument that we'll make. But it's not just a problem in Wales. The problem is in England as well, and you've seen in England where they've cut more money from social care and other preventative areas of spend, that the impact on the health service keeps driving up demand in the health service. So they're in an even more vicious negative spiral. And just to come back to the point a few people have made, I guess it's the difference between sitting in the seat I'm sitting in the chamber and sitting in a seat of an opposition councillor. And we all have different jobs to do, and I believe passionately, and I will argue till my dying breath, of the right you have as opposition councillors to make the points that you make, because I believe that the governance at a national level or a local level is quite often defined by the quality of opposition to ask questions, because things shouldn't just go through on a nod. We should be challenged as administration, even if that's uncomfortable for me. So I'll defend that to my dying breath. But please also recognise that in this seat, I have to make difficult decisions. We as administration have to make difficult decisions. And we don't do it lightly. We do it in full recognition of whatever decision we make on issues like the budget, there will be consequences for people. So I think that's a job for us on this side, to respect the job you've got to do, but also please respect the job that we have to do, because if we didn't balance a budget, and if we got ourselves into a situation like you've seen in Northamptonshire or Surrey or other places, where the bottom line for the services they run just doesn't add up, that would be devastating for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. So I hope we can approach it and draw this debate to a conclusion in that sort of respectful tone. The point Colette makes about improving the scrutiny process, I very much agree with, and I'll have an open door to that if members want to have a conversation with me. Referring to the point I just made, I emphatically don't believe that it's for me as leader to define what you can and can't do as scrutiny members. So I don't feel comfortable making suggestions, because that's for you to make. But put it this way, if you want to come to me with suggestions or requests, then I'll have an open ear, and that doesn't matter whether you're an opposition councillor or a fellow Labour councillor, because if we've got suggestions that could make a difference, then great. And just to finish the point Cathy makes, no Welsh councils have fallen over or gone bust. I don't believe we've seen a situation in Wales yet where social care, for example, has disintegrated to the point that it has in some English councils. Some English councils who I meet at national events seem to just meet 4 or 5 times a year to dole out contracts, and everything's done by the private sector. We're not in that situation in Wales, and I think we sometimes take that for granted. And that is because we've tried to work with the Welsh Government to try and keep the show on the road. And I think as councils we don't get enough credit sometimes for just keeping the show on the road. People take that for granted, perhaps. But it doesn't just happen, out of coincidence. It happens because we're willing to take difficult decisions like this. And I'll just close by saying I believe this is a budget that really does safeguard vital services for the long term and doesn't put them on a crisis footing, despite the difficult situations we face, and that's why I commend this budget.
Okay, I've got Nicholas, then Rob, then Stuart.
Yes, okay, thank you. I think Lily made some very good points there. I really just wanted to come back at Councillor Daniels on this. To suggest that this side of the chamber would be looking to cut services, the point that we're really making across here is not about the services. It's not about that. It's about the mismanagement of the money that is already there. Welsh Government receives sufficient funding to hand it back to us. And for want of repeating what Councillor Mills has already said, it is because we are suffering from mismanagement in Cardiff. The money's there, we're being mismanaged in Cardiff. And if we could go some way to doing that, then maybe the residents in Torfaen will not be asked to fund the failure in Cardiff, because that's effectively what we're saying. You are being in a position that you have to raise council tax because you're not being given the money that's already there. And I think there's a very different concept of where we're coming from. We're not looking to cut services per se. Yes, we are. We do expect everybody, including the Welsh Government, to live within their means. So that's what we talk about. We're talking about it in financial terms. And that's really all I wanted to say, just to point that out. The money is there, we're not getting it, and we need to make sure that it comes to us as deserved, and it isn't residents of Torfaen that have to continually fund that gap.
Okay, Rob's declined, so Stuart next.
Scrutiny this year was probably better than we've had, but
I take the point Colette and Rob say on regards to getting detailed questions and getting down through it. They does seem we need to start it earlier and we need to get the right questions. The point is members ask the questions. Maybe we need to get the questions in the process more, because there seems to be some frustration about the questions we're asking. And I take that point wholeheartedly, what questions you asked and what they are. Certainly with the budget process. And I'm very, very pleased that we're getting away from sitting in this chamber up there doing that, because it seems to be when we do the discussion type scrutiny, we get better scrutiny. People are a lot more comfortable with it, as long as it's not for 7 hours like we had there the other day. And you members, backbench members, are in charge of it. So you have to get down to the idea that you're doing the questioning. And that's the important thing you've got to... What's come out today's debate, fed back into the system. I'm sure Tom and company have taken that on board, because that is what scrutiny is all about. It's not about Anthony doing it. And Anthony wants the results of it, because without good scrutiny, the Cabinet can't function. They know that, and they listen to what's saying here. And I think that's so important. Maybe you need training and stuff, which we used to get the previous council. We need a lot of that. The better the scrutiny, the better the questions, the better the opposition. I'm interested to see what Anthony says on that one. But that is what you get without it. And I'm sure the officers, and I know Nigel's got a view on this as well. Interesting to hear what you say on that.
Thanks, Stuart. Gaynor?
Yes, it's just one fact I'd like to say in this chamber today, that Anthony has got plenty of backbone, and we thank God that Torfaen has got him for our leader. Thank you.
Okay, Faye?
I just wanted to say that it's very sad about the budget and that we have to put tax up like we do. But however, if you look at this country at the moment, is there not more money at the top of society, more billionaires than there has ever been? And are they living within their means? Because that's where all the money is. And it's very, very, very sad that we're the 6th richest country, or the 5th richest country in the world, and we have to do this to the likes of Torfaen, where people who used to be coal miners' families live, and where there's no money and lots of unemployment, and where we all have to struggle with the minimum wage and see all the homelessness in Newport and all the rest of it.
Okay, Richard Overton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have sort of a comment and sort of a question for the leader. Leader, it's now 30 years since the post-war Butsker-like consensus broke down and was replaced by a classical libertarian consensus, which epitomised the premierships of both Thatcher and Blair. In view of that consensus, I know that consensus once again is being challenged, but in view of that Thatcher-Blair consensus, why is the leader so disparaging about the private sector? You seem to say that English local authorities awarding contracts to the private sector was somehow immoral, and you believe completely of keeping services in-house. Now, if we put services out to tender and it meant less of a council tax raise, wouldn't that be a good thing?
Last one I got is Richard Clark, and then we'll come back to Anthony. Okay.
Thank you. I've been one of those gun-ho ones in the past who have demanded that the opposition have apologies for the voice, presented an alternative. Keith James, former leader of the Conservative group, nobly always abstained in the view that he hadn't presented an opportunity, an alternative. But in the general spirit of what's been said today, I'm not going to, as Councillor had said, sound like a broken record. I'm going to jump on Anthony's offer to all members that this should be part of the process of the budgets. No single person in this room has the monopoly of good ideas, certainly not myself. And if members have alternatives to how we can run services, whether you call it within your means, whether you call it whatever you want to, I think it's beholden on each and every one of us to bring that forward before the budget process. Indeed, before the last election, or maybe the budget before that, the independent group produced on the day a raft of measures. I cannot remember them for the life of me now, but some of them were damn good ideas. Now, if that had been built into the process earlier, then perhaps a council tax rise then and a council tax rise now might not be what it is. A number of people said they didn't come into politics to raise council tax. Sadly, today, the alternative is, and for anybody who's considering voting against this, justify the rate by all means. Blame the nasty old Labour cabinet if you want to. Blame the nasty old Labour government in Cardiff Bay if you want to. Blame the nasty Tory government if you want to. But the reality is, voting against this, and if this budget should fall today, you have to find an alternative for the money that would be raised by council tax. As the Executive Member for Adult Services, and with my colleagues who also cover the portfolio of health and social care, it is only right and proper that health and social care meet the burden that falls on the individuals of our authority. To that end, £2 million is being sought from adult social care. They're documented in your papers today, including a £265,000 restructure. If this budget falls today, it will be social care, it will be education, it will be all those service sectors that we provide that we have to go back to and look for further reductions. We have a chief officer who is statutorily obliged to advise us, and if that were front-end staff, he would have to advise this authority that it would be unsafe to provide services within Torfaen. But take away frontline services, you look at the reality, disabled facility grants at the moment, the budget has been spent for this year. As far as I'm aware at the moment, you've got 3 families who critically need services. This throat is from being quite ill for about 4 weeks. I'm not going to go into details, it's unpleasant. But I've known the benefit of a quick access to a toilet. If you can't get a disabled facilities grant to get a chairlift, to get to a toilet, etc., etc., that is degrading. What I've been through, and I've been allegedly able-bodied in the last 4 weeks, I found degrading on myself. You will have your constituents staying in hospitals because care packages aren't available for them. Richard mentioned the private sector. The sad reality in health and social care, and within this authority and neighbouring authorities, Monmouthshire in particular, we have seen care firms going bust because they can't provide the service that we require of them. Now, I think we made the bold and noble in principle step as a cabinet to bring domiciliary care and some parts elements of in that, and made a commitment to do that in the future. In those, we did go out, and it failed us. So the report that's gone to scrutiny, it looks better that that money is spent internally. In children's services, forgive me, Mandy, for treading on your toes, and going back to the point that I said about our chief officer. Lord Justice Laming, after the Baby P incident, suggested that social workers in children's social care should have a caseload of no greater than 16. Our social workers in children's care have a caseload of 25. I think they're doing a good job. They're supervised by management and they're coping with what they're doing. Otherwise, Keith, as the appropriate officer, would advise us. But the stress and burden that puts on those individuals is phenomenal. And God forbid we ever have anything like a Baby P in this authority. Now, I'm not trying to pull at members' heartstrings, because there's a raft of things in social care that you guys don't know about and I see on a daily basis, and it does come down to pounds, shillings and pence. If you reject this budget today, that will have an effect on social care, that will have an effect on the services we provide to individuals, and that will have an effect on your constituents. Go against us for what you want, go against the Welsh Government for what you want. When you're knocking doors at the Welsh Assembly elections, make your point. But today I ask you, unless you provide an alternative to find the millions of pounds that we will raise by council tax, you only morally can support this budget. Thank you.
If I can come back on those points then. Councillor Overton, thank you for raising the tone, talking about libertarian consensus. It's always something I'm more than happy to talk about. To clarify, I'm not disparaging about the private sector at all. The private sector does brilliant work doing what it does best. I also believe, however, that the public sector does brilliant work doing what it does best. And I believe there's been a part of that libertarian consensus, perhaps, if I'm to get philosophical, was a belief that public is always bad, private is always good. I don't believe that to be the case. Neither do I believe the case to be that public is always good and private is always bad. They do different things differently. But to touch back on the issue of social care and children's services that Richard has said, if we were running a business here, we'd look at the books and say, children's services, we don't want to be doing that anymore, pull out of that, because it doesn't make a profit, because it jeopardises the rest of our bottom line. But of course we can't do that as a council, neither would we ever, I hope. And it's just a case of not getting into either side of that paradigm and thinking one is always better than the other. I do believe, however, that public services, because of the nature of them, are usually best delivered by public servants. And the issue of domiciliary care for me isn't just an ideological one. It's one that I believe that we could get a better service in the long run for enablement and dementia services by employing people directly, who we can then get to holistically build around the people they're caring for, rather than just someone who's, at the end of the day, responding to a contract and what they have to deliver. I believe in the long term that provides better value for money. And yes, in the short term, some private sector outsourcing can reap benefits for short-term budgets. But in the long term, I think, the experience of councils in England, Barnet, for example, outsourced a lot of their services to Capita. They've had problems, and they're now having to bring some of those services back in. The other problem you tend to often find as well is that you'll get a good deal for maybe the first 5 years of a contract, but lo and behold, when you've no longer got the internal capacity and you come back out to take that contract again, the price has gone up. And you're left in a bit of an enviable situation. So I take the point that he makes in the tone that it was intended, and I'd never say that it's always public good or private bad, but I believe in some areas of public service, in most areas of public service, they're best delivered by public servants. I'd like to thank Richard for reminding us of the consequences of this budget. There are real consequences. If we don't pass a budget that balances at the end of the day, it gets taken off our hands. And a key part of balancing that budget is council tax rise. If there was no council tax rise, we would have to go back for £2.5 million of extra cuts. That's not just political rhetoric, that's financial fact. And because of the makeup of our budget, it would not be possible to get anywhere near that amount without touching into social care and education. In education, you're talking schools budgets. In social care, at the end of the day, you're talking the people who provide the services that we rely on, and areas like disabled facility grants, which would have to be cut. I don't think that's just me. If any officers want to come back in and confirm that, it's not just political rhetoric. And thank you also to Faye and Gaynor for pointing out the realities of that as well, and for their thanks. To go back to the backbone issue, I'm not someone who believes that backbone is shown by someone displaying a massive ego and vanity and sort of doing the big I am thing. I'm not Donald Trump. Hopefully no one would ever accuse me of being that way. But I believe that is a classic case of someone who's all out there with I'm the big I am, I'm powerful, I'm strong, and actually behind it, there's nothing there. I'd hope to be the opposite, to be someone who's quiet but then determined behind the scenes. And if you don't like that, then we'll just have to agree to disagree. On Stuart's point about scrutiny, I'm glad you recognise the improvements that we've made. Scrutiny has been listened to. There are changes that have been made to the budget because of scrutiny, and both recommendations and comments that we've taken on board. Maybe looking at your comments, as well as the budget next year, there's T22, and how you as scrutiny members engage with that, I think, is going to be key as well, to ask some of the questions about the long-term choices that we make, to really ask challenging questions if that's what you want to do. And again, I'm an open door to that. I think one of the good things in scrutiny is that really valid, engaged points were being made by councillors of all persuasions across this chamber. and I'd like to thank all of you genuinely for the input that you made in that. To end on Nicholas, on Councillor Jones's points, I think we'll just have to agree to disagree about the responsibility for where the money is. I would say that it's not due to failure in Cardiff, because look across the border in England, and if you tell any council leader in England that they live in the land of milk and honey because they haven't got the awful Welsh Government to deal with, they'll laugh in your face. They'd much rather be in our position than across the border. But we all, I think, want to maximise efficiency and cut waste at all levels of government. And any scrutiny that any of us can bring to bear that helps us towards that goal is a valuable thing, even if we don't always agree with each other.
I'm going to suggest now, because I've sort of been slowing down, people indicating that we have a last sweep, then we bring Anthony in, and then we'll try and move to a vote. So anyway, I've got Jason and Rose. Is there anybody else now? Louise and Gwyn? Okay. Right, if we start with Jason, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick point of clarification, and thank you for everybody's answers today. There's a line item under the CEO's office called Business Intelligence that seems to be quite significant. I just wondered if you could maybe explain what that is in a bit more detail. Thank you.
You see the page? Sorry.
89 would be one.
That contains all our administration and business support across the council. So when we did an admin and business services review a couple of years ago to take £1 million out, we then grouped them all together and put them in one place within the Chief Exec's area. So that's what that is.
Rose?
Thank you, Chair. I think we've had an excellent debate this morning. We've had a few slanging matches as well, but I think the debate has been really, really good because, and I keep going back to this, and I try not to, but I've been in this council a long time, and there was a budget when we never had a figure in a budget report. And I'm not joking. You can look at the minutes yourself. And it was actually me that said, actually, this budget doesn't even contain a figure. So we have come a long way, and we are improving all the time on the budget sessions that were held, and we try to have all-member input into it. I'd just like to say it's a difficult decision, and I'm not one for putting anything up if I can help it, apart from good practice and good work. I'd just like to say I've been here for years and years and seen the improvement in this budget process, and it's got to the stage where it is actually a very good process. Nobody in this room, including officers, wants to have any more difficult financial constrictions on our residents. But we were all elected to lead, and we're all elected as leaders to make difficult decisions. If you don't want to be taking difficult decisions, don't get yourself involved in leadership. Be the leaders that you are elected for and make the correct decision for the people of Torfaen today. Thank you.
Okay, Louise.
I'd just like to say, obviously, thank you to Nigel for this budget report, but my reasons I can support a 5.95% increase in council tax. My ward is obviously the most deprived in Torfaen, and there's already many struggling residents. I'm not naive, and I realise that there will have to be a rise in council tax, not year on year in, but I think it's far too high. I would have been happier maybe at 2 or 3%. We still waste an awful lot of money. We've wasted hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds on community farm. I don't like to say it, but community councils at £1.5 million a year. I would be quite happy to sit down with anybody and have a discussion of where we can save money. But just to say, and it's not because I'm sat on this side of the fence, far left, far right, wherever we are, I'm near enough on the middle anyway, I think. But it's not a case of I'm voting against the council tax rise because of that's what you want, that's just what we want. I will be doing it for my residents and my ward, and like I said, I am in one of the most deprived wards, and that's where I stand today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I got Gwyn.
Right, all I'd like to say is I'm not too keen on the slanging matches that's been going on here. At the end of the day, the government was voted in, Conservatives, Labour was voted in Cardiff. We've got to accept their decisions. We can fight them, but we've got to accept them. The thing is that we all know that May is a puppet at the moment. She's getting attacked from all ways. Right? What's the opposition? Anybody could have voted for that numpty? Nobody's going to vote for him. At the end of the day, we've got to like it and lump it. If we want to change, we've got to get the people out there to change. We've got to get them to vote. That's like the lady said over there, we've all been elected as leaders. And as a leader, I think that what have gone on in here today is not going to put it in a good light with the people out there. My decision is still wavering at the moment, and I'll see when the vote comes up. But at the end of the day, I appreciate the way Richard spoke. I thought he spoke eloquently, put it on the line, and it did touch a few heartstrings with me because I've been personally involved with family members. Richard have done the same. David done the same. I know they're all Labour members, and the same this side here. We've all put our point of view across, but at the end of the day, we've got to make a decision for the people of our electorate. And like Louise said, she's one of the poorest areas. I don't think mine is very affluent. That seems to be all down south. But at the end of the day, let's get a little bit more respect for people in here. Let's get a bit more respect for parties in here. Let's get a bit of respect of what's going on in here. And I'd like to thank you all for your presentation, and thank you very much.
Okay, I got Gaynor.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that I heard right what Louise Shepherd have said about the Community Council wasting money. Is that what you said? She's saying that we waste money on the Community Council. Community councils get their own budget. And I'm telling you now, without the Community Council down there, God knows what would happen either.
Okay, I think that's it. So we're going to have Anthony now just sort of sum up, and then.
Be as quick as I can, promise. Point on community councils. Community councils are directly funded, and I think without many of our community councils locally stepping in to the void to, things we've had to not do, the communities would be a lot worse off. So I'd like to thank, as part of this budget, the community councils and the community councillors for all they do, because at the end of the day they're voluntary and they do that out of a passion for their communities. And I think ever more in this climate they're coming into their own, and the work that they do is invaluable. So yeah, that's that. On to what Gwyn and Louise said. Look, I guess if you're running services day to day, you're bound to reflect on the needs of those services and those users from our perspective. And look, no one wants to raise council tax. We've had that debate. So look, I hope you don't realise that that's a lack of respect on our part. This issue of waste, however, I think is sometimes used as a bit of a avoiding tough decisions sort of totem. The community farm, for example, many members would defend that as being the opposite of a waste of money in what the community farm does, and I don't want to get into that debate now. We'll have that debate at another time. But so many of the services that we run, and that is one of them, have great value to different people. There's over 80 different services, I believe, that are run by the council, and it's our job to try and balance all those things. No organisation is ever 100% efficient and perfect, but I believe one of the savings that was just mentioned, the Admin and Business Services Review by Nigel, that's less than 2 years ago, and that's taken £1 million out of the centre of this organisation. So we have tried to look at, and we will continue to try to look at how we can take money out, but as the amount of money we've got keeps going down so drastically in real terms, the idea that just by being more efficient we can make that problem go away, I wish that was true. I don't thank Rose for the point she makes about the journey that we've come on and about the importance of leadership. And I've certainly found in the 7 years I've been here, since reliably promising to my wife that I'd just be a backbench member and I wouldn't let it take over my life. The leadership is very often having to do the difficult thing rather than the easy thing. And so that's what we're having to do, especially in the situation we've been placed in by decisions over our head. So I'd like to close on that point, and again I would like to commend this budget to members. It's not easy, and thank you for the work that you do as members out in your communities, because I know we all get sort of flack from people and we all have to stand up and defend things and to do work, all times of the day and night, all times of the year. We do that because we love our communities, and I believe that you all love your communities and you do that work for the right reasons, whether you're on my side of the chamber or not.
Thank you. And I just want to say thanks to Anthony as well for being willing to come back and forth, because otherwise, it wouldn't have been as much of a debate as it was. Right, so with that in mind, we're going to move to the recommendations on page 55. So do we have, these are to approve, so do we have anybody to move? And second? Okay. Okay, I need 6 people to support. Okay. So we'll go through then, as usual, as like a register, and say 4, which is to approve, against.
Okay, Councillor Stuart Ashley. Councillor Ronald Burnett.
Someone's got their mic, so I think it's Liz. There we go.
Okay, Councillor Ronald Burnett.
Against.
Councillor Glyn Karen. Councillor Richard Clark.
Can I just ask people to use their microphones, please, because it's a recorded vote for a reason?
For.
Yeah, just as well, just because the webcast will pick it up, then it might not otherwise.
Councillor Veronica Crick.
For.
Yeah. Oh, Richard Clark.
4.
Okay. Sorry, Richard. Veronica Crick, 4. Councillor Fiona Cross.
4.
Councillor David Daniels.
4.
Councillor Giles Davis.
4.
Councillor Cathy Evans.
4.
Councillor Stephen Evans.
4.
Councillor Joanne Gordon.
4.
Councillor Elizabeth Haynes.
Against.
Councillor John Hawler.
4.
Councillor Anthony Hunt.
4.
Councillor Gaynor James.
4.
Councillor Gwynget Jenkins.
Against.
Councillor Mike Jeremiah.
Against.
Councillor Alan Jones.
4.
Councillor Faye Jones.
4.
Councillor Janet Jones.
Against.
Councillor Nicholas Jones.
Against.
Councillor Peter Jones.
4.
Councillor Robert Kemp.
Against.
Councillor Sue Malson.
4.
Councillor Raymond Mills.
Against.
Councillor Jason O'Connell.
Against.
Councillor Richard Overton.
Against.
Councillor Mandy Owen.
4.
Councillor Norma Parish.
4.
Councillor Jessica Powell.
4.
Councillor Kelly Preston.
4.
Councillor Emma Rapier.
4.
Councillor Rose Seaborn.
4.
Councillor Louise Shepherd.
Against.
Councillor Alan Slade.
Against.
Councillor Christopher Tew.
Against.
Councillor Colette Thomas.
4.
Councillor Dave Thomas. Not arrived yet, is he?
I'm here.
Oh, is he? Sorry.
Yeah, against.
Against. Councillor Neil Waite.
4.
Councillor Raymond Mills. William, sorry. Sorry. Nearly there. Against. And Councillor David Yowell.
4.
Okay. So there's 1, 2, 3. Is that where you go? Is it? Yeah. Okay. Shall I? Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, members then. Okay, so there was 15 against, 26 for, so the budget is approved. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to call a break for 10 minutes because I've drank a lot of water and I think we could all do with 10 minutes to... To item 11, improving wellbeing in Torvine. Oh, sorry, we're on 10 because I've just crossed out the wrong one. So, so what we're actually doing is amendments to the Constitution, and Delith House will present the report.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Yes, the purpose of this report is to revise the executive portfolios for implementation of Council's annual general meeting, and also to revise the overview and scrutiny portfolios, to revise the arrangements for some of the Council's overview and scrutiny committees to have standing non-statutory co-opted members, to update the decision-making responsibilities associated with the current leadership structure, and to amend the wording associated with the attendance of co-opted and non-voting members of committees. So with regard to the changes to the executive portfolios, the current portfolios were introduced in 2017 following the local elections. Changes in operating structures of the Council now require some slight adjustments to be made to better align activities and accountabilities. The proposed changes are set out in full in Appendix 1 to this report. I would, however, like to draw members' attention to some 3 minor amendments to Appendix 1. The first one is on page 211, under Executive Member Resources. You've got archives. Archives will now be moved to the responsibility of the Executive Member for corporate governance and performance. The second amendment is on page 212, where you've got play service and youth service under the Executive Member for Education. It is proposed that those will be the responsibility of the Executive Member for children, families and communities. And on page 215, the title of the Executive Member for Economy and Skills will be amended to include regeneration. Then, with regard to the changes to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee portfolios, the proposed changes to those committees are set out in Appendix 2 to this report. These changes will bring them into line with the changes outlined in paragraph 5.1 above. The next relates to the non-statutory co-optees. For a number of years, the Council's constitution has allowed several of the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committees to have standing non-voting co-opted members. Where these positions have been filled, the contributions made by the co-opted members have been helpful in scrutinising the issues under review. However, since Overview and Scrutiny Committees have moved to single-item agendas, their work is being supported more and more by research and the attendance of expert witnesses. So it is therefore proposed to amend the Constitution as set out in Appendix 3 to this report so that there will be fewer co-opted members. The next relates to the decision-making responsibilities associated with the current leadership structure. The Head of Strategic Services was classified as a Chief Officer for the purposes of decision-making. He has now left, and it is proposed that the Head of Transformation and Improvement replaces the Head of Strategic Services as a decision-maker. There's also a slight amendment in terms of a change in the title of the Assistant Chief Executive, and those changes are set out in Appendix 4 of the report. Finally, there's going to be an amendment to the wording associated with the attendance of co-opted and non-voting members of committees. Many of the Council's regulatory committees are only required within the Constitution to meet once per year. Most, however, meet quarterly. Paragraph 3.5.4 of the Constitution refers to the required attendance of any co-opted and non-voting members of these committees to prevent disqualification. So in some circumstances, disqualification could constitute missing only one meeting, and therefore it is proposed to amend the wording as set out in Appendix 5 to this report to add the words highlighted in bold. So the recommendation, members, is contained in paragraph 11.1 of the report. So the Council agrees that the monitoring officer, in consultation with the Members' Constitution Working Party, be granted delegated authority to make amendments to the Constitution to reflect the changes set out in this report. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Okay, and the leader's going to come in now just to explain a few points.
I'd like to thank for that report. The minor amendments to the appendix are welcome. I'd just like to add to those on the issue of Green Meadow Community Farm, just to put on notice that we're awaiting the report of the Overview and Scrutiny Task and Finish Group before deciding on what the best location for this would be in the future within the portfolios.
Members, are there any questions or comments about this one? If not, then I'll be happy to can I have a mover and a seconder for Stephen? Thank you. Okay, I'll be happy then to approve that that be delegated. Show of hands. Thank you very much. Right, now we're on number 11, which was improving wellbeing in Torvine. Alison Ward's going to present the report.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. This report is to approve the report entitled Improving Wellbeing in Torvine, which is attached at Appendix 1 to the report you have in front of you. And that comprises both the statutory annual wellbeing statement and the annual improvement plan. Members will know that Corporate Plan 3 contains 3 politically selected priorities which Council agreed in January of 2016. And during the 1920 financial year, improvements in these priorities will be delivered, monitored and reported through the Council's service plans, which each service area develops. The key activities and measures from these service plans have been used then to populate the Council's statutory wellbeing statement for 1920, so there's a clear read across from the service plans to the wellbeing plan. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act requires us to publish a set of wellbeing objectives, and we must also at the same time set out our agreed improvement objectives for the year under the local government measure. So the wellbeing statement needs to set out the 5 ways of working which are set out at 5.3 of the report, the 5 ways of working being that we look in the long term, balancing short-term needs against long-term imperatives, that we look at prevention, so we're looking at how we can prevent things, demand and other problems occurring or getting worse, that we look at integrating how the public body's wellbeing objectives impact on each of their wellbeing goals across the piece, that we look at collaboration with other agencies and with the community, and that we look at involvement of local people in developing the wellbeing goals. So we need to take cognizance of those 5 ways of working in our wellbeing statement, and we also need to demonstrate how they in turn will contribute to the 7 national wellbeing goals, which are set out at 5.4, which is a prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales, a healthier Wales, a more equal Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, a Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language, and a globally responsible Wales. So that the whole of this plan is based on the framework of the 5 ways of working and the 7 national wellbeing goals. The Council has revised its approach going into 1920 from a more project-based approach around the wellbeing objectives to aligning those objectives more thoroughly with the Council's corporate plan priorities. The Improving Wellbeing in Torvine report demonstrates significant progress being made to deliver the Council's 17-18 wellbeing objectives. So, members, the plan is set out at Appendix 1. You've had a long morning already, so I'm not going to go into any further detail. But should you have any questions, Chief Officers will be here to answer anything relating to their particular part of the plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions or comments? Steve?
Looking in the document, I see on consultation you not be involved with the fire service. Is there any particular reason why?
So I'll just ask Tom Roberts to come up and answer that.
Sorry, can I just have the question again?
Consultation on page, well, I can't understand which page it is. Because You've not involved the fire service. Is there any particular reason why?
In what respect would you expect the fire service to be consulted, sorry?
They're usually involved in social aspects, not just fires. They go into things to deal with people that need help, and they sit on public service board. So, I mean, you're involved in the police and everybody else. Why aren't you involved in them?
The leader's going to come in and...
I mean, it's a valid question, and I can assure Councillor Evans the fire service are a very engaged partner in the Public Service Board, and they send regular attendees to the PSB, both the operational group and the management group, and they are involved in the decisions. I think they've got a lot to teach us about early intervention prevention, for example, and the work they've done there.
Just to be clear, this is Torvine Council's wellbeing statement as opposed to the PSB's wellbeing plan, which involves all the partner organisations. This is Torvine's Council's contribution.
Any other questions or comments?
I understand that, but you're involved when police. Now, the fire service is a very important part of this, should be of this consultation.
Okay. Right. Given that, are we happy to have a mover and seconder then for this report? Yep, second. Can I have a show of hands then, those in favour? Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. That is approved. We move on then to agenda item 12, which is the annual strategic equality report, and Kate Williams is going to present for us.
Good afternoon, Council. I would like to provide the Council with the annual report for 2017-18 on Torvine's Council progress on its annual strategic equality plan. I would also like to thank all those that have contributed internally and externally. Although I collate the report, this is a report that is compiled from departments from all over the Council. The annual Strategic Equality Report is Torvine's progress on the Strategic Equality Plan. The report is for the financial year from April 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2018. It focuses on the 10 strategic equality objectives and exploring the work that is being done against the actions that sit under each one. The annual Strategic Equality Report 2017-18 needs to be published on the website in English and Welsh on April 1st, 2019. This is a statutory requirement under the Public Sector Equality Duty. The Equality Act 2010 places a statutory duty on all local authorities to develop and publish a strategic equality plan every 4 years. Our strategic equality plan was published in April 2016. Officers have started discussions about preparing for the next strategic equality plan, which is due to be published in 2020. Early discussions with Welsh Government have indicated that they would encourage local authorities to align their objectives to those of Welsh Governments. It can be noted from the annual report that the Council's progress in relation to its statutory responsibilities under the Equality Act is both compliant and satisfactory, and in relation to a number of the equality objectives that were set in the Strategic Equality Plan, there has been significant progress in a number of key areas, and these are listed on page 297. Historically, the reports have always been presented a year out of date. This is a legacy from when the first 4-year strategic equality plan had to be produced. We will be changing the publishing date of the next report, and we were hoping to align this with the Welsh language report in possibly June or July 2019. This will be far more relevant as it will be reporting for the last financial year. It will also focus much more on the positive achievements from the year that we've just had. I'm asking that an agreement can be sought to publish the annual report on April 1st, 2019, but that a more relevant discussion around the progress on the equality objectives be scheduled for a future council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions or comments on this one? Stuart first and then Peter.
Is there a requirement for this equality report, equality measures
in this report to be beholden on organisations that we grant fund. I don't mean, we give money to. I ask that because I obviously represent on a few outside bodies, and I'm just wondering whether it's a stipulation we can make.
I don't think so. I think they're organisations in their own right. I think we would try and influence. We would try and influence that, but I don't. To my knowledge, we'll have to come back to you to confirm that.
I'm not actually talking about organisations. I'm talking about devolved bodies. I'll tell you afterwards what I'm on about, because it's organisations, like schools, allotments, that sort of thing, not separate organisations.
Yeah, we'll come back to that then, and you can get a written answer, or Dave will just come to it. Peter Jones now.
Thank you. I like this report, and there's a huge amount of good work going on. I was particularly pleased to see the excellent work that's going on to address domestic violence in our community. Well done. I just got one little query. In the equality objectives of 2016 to 20, we talk about reducing economic disadvantage and poverty faced by many disabled people. Do we monitor, I just wondered, and this is something perhaps we can think of for the future, do we monitor the number of disabled people that are employed by our council? And if we do, could we have some sort of, maybe not for this report, but in the future, just a trend? Because I'd like to hope that maybe we could see an increasing number of disabled people being employed, because they do face a huge problem in terms of not being able to get into work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. We do monitor it, but going forward, I think there's a lot more work that we can kind of do to influence. Quite happy to kind of bring back to possibly scrutiny when we're looking at the next strategic equality plan. If there wants to be more focus around certain elements, then I'd be quite happy to have those discussions. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Colette next then.
Welsh Government recognises BSL, British Sign Language, as a language. I just wondered how we are supporting people who may need to use BSL in our services.
It might be a difficult one for either Kate or I to answer, because this is obviously, as stated in Kate's statement, this is a collation of all sorts of service areas, so we don't have any expertise in those specific areas. So maybe one of these issues that I'll have to come back to you on. Is that okay?
We do provide BSL support if required. If a member of the public required something in BSL, we would provide that documentation. Is that really what you meant, or just actually accessing services?
If anybody needed to access services, obviously support.
Okay, Rose.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased with Objective 3 on page 326. But as described in our local surgery this week, it's ideal to have drop curbs for people to get access outside their homes. Yeah. But when car parks right over the drop curb in the middle of the pavement, I think we really need to look at implementing the drop curb system, but have some control over the parking and the responsibility of parking within our borough. I know we are oversubscribed with cars and it's very difficult to find a parking space, but when people actually park over a drop curve or a pavement, it's very difficult for not only our disabled users, but our young mums with prams and anybody with access issues getting on and off pavements and travelling around. Thank you.
We quite often get contacted about that. So the Gwent Police, for trying to move cars and fines, it is an issue. But absolutely, we would welcome support to tackle that.
Okay, I got Sue next.
Thank you.
Just going to answer a bit on the car park, if that's okay, Sue.
I mean, were you going to answer it?
Yeah. I just
okay, sorry.
Okay, Fiona will answer on the car.
In order to address your point about car parking, I totally agree, and I find it a real point of frustration. It denies people access, it denies people independence, and it is very irresponsible of members of our communities to think that, oh, well, I'll just park wherever I like, especially if it's a drop curb. We are taking civil enforcement in-house. a report is proposed to come in the next few months. So hopefully that'll help to address that issue as well.
Okay, Sue, sorry for that.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the report. If we go to page 319, we've got a table there of the increase of abuse, racial, homophobic, disability, transphobic, religious, and it's on an increase on each year. I can appreciate the fact that the efforts that via social media that's going out there to prevent this, and other agencies are working with it. Is there any more that we can do? Because this is alarming with the rate of each and every one of them, with the figures that's rising over the years.
This report doesn't really reference what's happened in the year that's just gone as well, you know, so I think there's so much of the work that the Equalities, Cohesion and Community Safety team are doing with Gwent Police. We have a regular standing item on our community safety meetings over at the Hub, and that is specifically around hate crime. So we are trying to do so much more, raise awareness and everything like that of that issue, because it is, you know, it is increasing, all sorts of hate crime. So that is something that we are really pushing on and driving on at the moment.
Got Stuart next, then David.
I'd like to thank Rose for bringing up the whole issue about disability access, because it's a bête noire of mine about access around the place. Sorry to be parochial, you try getting round Pontnewid on drop curbs. Rose has brought that one up. Anywhere in Cumbraon, anywhere in the borough. It's an issue that I love your team to look at, and you've raised it. You've also raised the whole business in here about sensory rooms in schools. As somebody with autistic young people in my house, that issue around the whole thing of people with autism, and then the other issue about we brought up in scrutiny fairly recently, very lively scrutiny about loose toilets. That was there for everybody to look at. Very big issue. Older people and people with disability. I can go on and on. It's in your report here. But a lot of those issues, I know your team was dealing with that very nicely. And PSB and the rest of it. There's a lot of issues involved in here. There's a lot in this report which teases out. I'm sure it's going to be subject of a fair few scrutinies in future. Thank you for that.
Thanks very much for your positive comments. As I said, hopefully when we bring the next report, it will be more relevant that we're talking about the things that are fresh in our minds, because there is so much positive stuff that's been going on. I'd also like to thank Stephen Honeywell. He's new to our team, and he's been really supportive in trying to get this document together. And you know, I just think bringing this back now, we'll have a lot more positives to share with you.
David?
Just to pick up Sue's point, yeah, just looking at the statistics here, there are some worrying trends in there around hate crime. Just as an action to attach to your point, I wonder whether we could organise maybe Gwent Police to come in and give a specific seminar on these figures and the drivers behind them. So as an action.
Other questions or comments, members? The recommendations then are to note the content and approve the report. Do I have a mover and seconder? Thank you. Show of hands, those in favour. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. That is approved. Agenda item 13, appointment of a lay member of the Audit Committee. Jonathan is going to present the report.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Yes, the purpose of this report is to seek approval to the selection procedure for the appointment of a lay member for the Audit Committee. The Local Government Wales Measure 2011 introduced the requirement to include at least one lay member on the Audit Committee. Statutory guidance recommends the lay members should be independent from the Council and have no business connection with it, although knowledge of how local government functions would be a definite advantage. The lay member appointed to the committee in 2012 has indicated that he no longer wishes to serve on the committee due to work commitments, and his term of appointment will therefore end in May of this year. The local authority is required to appoint another lay member to enable the audit committee to carry on its business. In view of the limited time available and the fact that the committee cannot convene without a lay member, it is recommended that the independent members of the Ethics Standards Committee are invited to express an interest in sitting on the Audit Committee. It is proposed that this appointment would continue until the next elections in 2022, so that a public recruitment exercise can then be undertaken to appoint a lay member for up to 2 full terms of the local authority. It is suggested that a panel is convened to oversee the selection process if more than one independent member expresses an interest. So the recommendation is contained in paragraph 7.1 in that the Council endorses the procedure used to select an independent member of the Audit Committee. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Okay. Members, any questions or comments? I got Rob first.
Thank you, Chair. If a member of the Ethics and Standards Committee applies to become a member of the Audit Committee and was successful, this bit of clarification, would that person then sit on both the Ethics and Standard Committee and the Audit, or come off the Ethics and Standard Committee?
That person could sit on both committees.
Any others? Glyn?
Yeah, just to say, can we send our thanks to John for his work with the Audit Committee? He has been an excellent servant on that committee. He was a trained auditor, so he was pretty good at what he did, and has been invaluable assistance, I think, to the committee. So I think our thanks to him would be appreciated.
Okay, any other questions or comments on that one? Okay, so are we happy? We're going to be asked to endorse the procedure. Can I have a mover and seconder? Show of hands, those in favour. Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. That's approved. Okay, item 14, we're looking at delegated decisions for outside bodies. I think that's Dallas again.
Thank you. Yes, this is to advise members of delegated decisions taken by the Leader and Chief Executive in relation to nominating members to serve on outside bodies. Council decided on the 15th of May last year to nominate Councillor Rosemary Seaborn to serve on the Torvine Leisure Trust Board of Trustees. Councillor Seaborn has since stood down from that nomination, and Councillor Giles Davies has been nominated to serve on Torvine Leisure Trust under the delegated powers referred to above. So the recommendation is that Council notes the nomination listed in this report. Thank you.
And the Leader's going to come in.
Can I remove this report? Can I move this report? Sorry. Sorry. Bad way to misspeak. Can I move this report? And in doing so, can I thank Councillor Davis for agreeing to step up to this post, and thank Councillor Seaborn for her diligent work as a representative of the Council and Torvine Leisure Trust.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Yeah. Okay, are we happy to show of hands then to note, in favour of noting? Okay, anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. We've noted that decision. Item 15 then is about the SRS severance payments. I'm going to ask Matt Lewis to present the report for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Lewis. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the SRS. The background at the start of the paper, I guess, if anyone is unsure about partners at the SRS, because we've added some over the last couple of years. Our partner organisations, there's five of them now, so it's Blanagh Gwent Council, Gwent Police and Crime Commissioner, Monmouth Council, Newport Council and Torvine Council. So there are 5 partners when we talk about the SRS and who we provide services to. So the purpose of this report today is to seek permission from the Council in respect of severance costs of a Chief Officer within the SRS. So on the first page there's a set of key messages that I felt were important to get across and explain to the group. So I've mentioned the 5 partners, so 5 different organisations fund the SRS. They fund to different levels because they take slightly different services or might require more of one thing than another. And the total budget of the SRS is kind of around the £13.2 million from all 5 partners. And that covers everything: staffing, networking costs, hardware, software, the whole lot. So 5 partners. The SLT Chief Officer members are funded 5 ways, so it's a split cost. So as the paper will explain as I've worked my way through, this cost isn't entirely attributable to Torvine, it's split 5 ways. The report details a severance package for an individual Chief Officer who is part of the SLT at the SRS. It's important to mention that this does fit into a wider set of voluntary redundancies we're looking at the moment in the SRS from a process we've run. And again, I'll run you through that process, but this sits in a group of other activities that we're taking. The cost associated with the severance that's detailed in this paper is being borne entirely from in-year SRS staffing underspend. So this isn't a paper that's coming back seeking more funding or additional funding to make this happen. We can make this happen from within existing budgets already. And again, just to mention, the Chief Officer we're talking of here is split 5 ways equally across the partners. So if we go down to the background of the paper, there's obviously been a lot of discussion this morning around budget setting, so we're no different to that. We've got a Finance and Governance Board. Nigel Aurelia sits on that from behalf of Torfaen, as do the 151s from all the other partners. We were tasked with a savings target back in October of around 500 to 700k for the whole organisation. So when we look at what are our controllable costs, one of the only ways to do that is to offer out to the organisation whether people would like to transition out and what that could look like. When we went back to the Finance and Governance Board in February, we took a wider set of savings options. They included 15 different things, one of which was surrounding this particular voluntary redundancy. So we've worked our way through all 15 of those. The board's accepted 11, of which this is one. And then the result of that is we need to bring this Chief Officer decision to this group, and then the others we can work our way through. The voluntary redundancy process started in early January. We put a trawl out to the whole organisation of the SRS. We had around 35 people come back and say, we would like to know what our numbers are. As you do with every trawl, people are interested to know what they could get. HR were clear on the response, who now wants to be considered when you've received your numbers, and that came down to 16 people. We reviewed all 16 to see whether we could leave or allow some of those people to transition out based on the service we need to provide. We've rejected 9 of those and accepted 7. Again, one of these being the Chief Officer role that we're here today with. So if we work our way down to section 6, that talks about the need to bring this decision here today and why we're seeking permission from Council. I think a number have been done over the last few months as well, so probably well aware of the Localism Act and the need for me to bring a Chief Officer severance decision to this group for the permission to make it happen. If we look in section 6.2, then it talks about the costs of actually enabling this to happen. There are 2 parts to those costs. There's a redundancy cost as a pension strain cost, and both of those are detailed in that section. And again, both of those one-off payments will come from in-year staffing underspend within the SRS. Section 7 then is the funding mechanism, just to clarify what we're doing. There is an in-year surplus, particularly related to staffing within the SRS, that we will use for the wider voluntary redundancies and for this Chief Officer redundancy. And we're looking at fitting with inside the policy that already exists, which is if something can be done on a 2-year payback, then you can progress with those different voluntary redundancies. So when we look at the entire package of 7, there's a payback of around about 19 months on all of those roles when you put them together. Again, in that section, it's just clarifying that Torfaen contributes only 20% of the cost of that individual. So when you add in the numbers together for the total cost of the severance, the cost for Torfaen is 1/5 of that. It's 20% of that total cost, and the rest goes to the other 4 partners within the SRS. Moving down to the benefit to partners, when we took this to the Finance and Governance Board in early February, we talked about the financial benefits of this, and that section there, 8.1, it describes the benefits of the entire package of VR proposals, not simply the Chief Officer one. So it does talk about the entire package of reduction will be 359k per year. Due to some reconfiguration that we need to make happen, we'll retain around 59 of that to make some changes within the SRS for staffing to be able to cope with these people leaving the organisation. So the annual saving to the 5 partners will be around 300k. Service benefits, we have started a restructure at the SRS. We started at SLT level. So this time last year, for example, we had 7 SLT members, 2 temporary. When we work through this, we'll end up with 4 in the SLT. So it's quite a different look to the organisation from where it was last year. That restructure is looking at an operational half and a kind of strategy and enterprise half. So this change supports what we're trying to do there as well. It will make some of that simpler, and it will make it slightly quicker to make happen for us as well. So when we then look at who we've consulted on the process to get here, it's been through my SLT, it's been to the Finance and Governance Board and agreed to progress. And we've also discussed with Alison to prepare this paper to bring here today. There's a set of actions there that will follow. if the permission is given. We'll be talking to all the individual staff about dates. I've already sat down individually with every single one and talked about what kind of things need handed over, what kind of things they start to need thinking about. But this is really about the final steps of the termination process, because that's the HR term for it, even though it's voluntary redundancy, and what that looks like profiled over the next 12-month period. The sooner we can make this happen, the sooner we can start to achieve the savings, and the sooner we can start to contribute towards the savings target we've been given by our Finance and Governance Board. That's the paper. I'm happy to take any questions. There's a recommendation at the end, but more than happy to take any questions.
So, Matt, for clarity, so we're being asked to pay about 24k, is that right?
It's money that's already...
Okay then, I have Ronnie over that, then Rob.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back a few years now when the SRS was set up under the previous leader that was here, and it was going to be the flagship of technology. And I don't think we've been very impressed over the years, but you haven't said, well, my question is, what has actually happened there to make all these redundancies? Where has it failed itself? Why has it failed to create these redundancies?
From my perspective, I don't think anything has failed to create a set of redundancies. This is a response to a savings target that we've been given, and given staff an opportunity to move out of the organisation. I think when we do a kind of annual report that we take to the SRS board, we do 5 separate scrutinies as well. So we're in Newport scrutiny in a week and a half's time. And when you start to write down all the things that have been achieved, you don't truly realise the success you've had. Obviously, there's failures and there's successes. There's a fair balance of both. But I think some of these redundancies will be enabled by the fact that we now do things very differently. So we're starting to drive down difference across the 5 organisations. So if I take them, I don't want to go into loads of detail, but if I take the Midlands HR system as an example, there used to be 5 separate implementations of that HR system that some of these people would need to support in 5 different ways. So they'd need to have a skill set that could manage something in that product and that product and that product. Imran Roper, one of our enterprise architects, has brought together those Midland HR implementations onto a single platform. So now we only need to do that upgrade once. We only need to look after one set of hardware. So I think I wouldn't class this as something's failed, therefore we need to get rid of people. I would class this more as, because of some of the successes, we're now able to let some people go to achieve our savings target.
Just one question then, we're letting people go. As members here, we all have our computers, and if we're working at home and something's gone wrong, and we just ring up SRS and say, thank you for your call, it's very important, you're 7th in the queue. And it says, please, if you're in the office, well, we're not in the office, we're at home, and you just give up on it sometimes. I mean, we all know, we all have complaints about these new laptops we've got, and they're always coming in and out. But if you're 7th in the queue, it could be for an hour just waiting for a response.
So I'm happy to provide our monthly performance document we take into a delivery group here that Dave Lilly chairs for Torvine. So there's an SRS chaired meeting, Dave Lilly represents Torvine at the meeting. So we present performance stats in that session. So I'm more than happy to share any of those. And what we've seen over a 12-month period is you might phone up and be 7th in the queue. But so, for example, for this month, the average pickup time is 2 minutes 50 seconds. So you might be 7th in the queue, and it might be a really bad day where that takes 10 minutes to be picked up. It might be a great day where you're picked up in 5 seconds. But what we can tell by the phone system and by the fact that when your call's answered and responded to, we know that the average has come down from 7-8 minutes last year to under 3 minutes this year. I'm happy to provide those.
Right, thank you for that. Well, so next time I ring up, I'll just time it and let you know, all right?
Okay, I got Rob Kemp and then Elisa.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, there's another 4 partners involved in this as well, and I'm going to assume that this report has gone to the other 4 partners as well. And so the fact that there's the total of 5 partners...
Rob, the Chief Executive... Oh, sorry.
Finish your question.
Sorry.
It's like the fact that there's 5 partners involved. What happens if one of the partners declines or votes against this, or your proposition as such, regarding financially as well?
So one thing maybe I didn't mention in this paper is when the SRS was originally set up, the Memorandum of Understanding gave each organisation a set of responsibilities for the SRS. At that time, Torvines was HR, probably because Peter Durkin was a board member at that time and had HR in his portfolio, and everyone had their own strengths. So all of our staff are host employed by Torvine. So all 200 staff, 220 staff are host employed by this organisation. So there's a slightly different process that we need to take it through for Torvine compared to everybody else. This paper has already been to the Finance and Governance Board. I mentioned all the 151 sit on that board. They've seen all 7 of the VR options and they've agreed all 7. So from my perspective, each organisation has agreed to make this happen. It's simply we need to follow this process because of the Localism Act and our host employment status to bring it through Torvine for you to give permission for Alison then to make the decision. So,
Chief Exec's going to...
Yeah, this report won't go to the other councils because we are the employer of all the staff. So, and as regards the other voluntary redundancies, that's a decision for me to make as head of paid service because they're our staff. It's just because of the Localism Act, any chief officer whose package in total, including pension strain, comes over 100,000 has to go to full council. So whilst all partners have been involved in putting this package together and approving it, only this council needs to make this decision.
I think we're touching on wider SRS sort of debate now, and I think it's always good to have that in this chamber, either as a member seminar or in this forum. But just to say, when we set up the SRS, I guess our aims were to improve the service, to drive down costs and avoid costs that otherwise would have been fallen upon us. And just I think there's a story to tell there because the organisation's expanded from 3 to 5 with new partners on board, and it's a sort of a model of sharing a service. What do you think the costs would have been on us as an authority had we tried to continue the old model of just doing it on our own?
That's the question. You could do that by every single individual system. You could do it by the fact that you get access to parts of people. So when we talk to some organisations, they like to say, I get a leg of somebody or an arm of somebody or a head of somebody, simply because we're able to bring somebody in with a specific skill set that's used across all 5. If you had to have that in your own organisations and separate back out, it wouldn't be 220 people. It would be back to the pre-SRS days of more staff each organisation. So, for example, some of these organisations came in with 50 staff, and they no longer pay for 50 staff because they pay for parts of people across the organisations. It's really difficult to put a number on it, and it'd be kind of by service area, by different system application, by different ways of doing things. But it would be considerably more. When I think a small example, I guess, is when some of the schools come to us and may be thinking about stepping away from an SLA. When you sit down and document the cost of replicating everything we do into a small environment like a school, the costs are phenomenal. And that would be the same for each individual council. It would be much greater than it is together.
Okay, any other comments or questions on this one? Nope. Okay then. Any other sheets? Do we have somebody to move then? That we accept? Yeah, second. Okay, a show of hands then, those in favour. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's approved. Okay, yes, so everybody, chief officers are going to leave now for the pay policy statement, except for those officers that we said earlier would remain. So we'll give them a couple of minutes.
Just to remind those members with prejudicial interests as well.
Sorry, members, if you declared a prejudicial interest, you must also leave for this item. Okay, I think everybody's left now who needs to, so if we go through the report then.
Okay. I'll try not to keep you too long. The report you've got in front of you today is the pay policy statement, and under the Localism Act, we have a statutory responsibility to publish a statement about the way that we pay staff within this authority on an annual basis, and also to publish that before the 31st of March. So it typically comes along alongside the budget at a similar time. But in terms of key messages, as I said, it's an annual statement. It sets our position out in terms of pay arrangements within the council. One of the main thrusts of the report is to identify the relationship between senior chief officer pay and median pay and the lowest pay within the organisation, and that is set out in the statement in section 8 of the pay policy statement. And you'll note that pleasingly the ratios continue to decline in a positive way. So the multiples between the lowest paid and the highest paid within the organisation continue to go down. So that's of note. A couple of key issues, key changes from what was presented to you last year was that there's been an introduction of a new pay spine for the majority of our staff within the council. Those that are not employed as teachers, majority of the remainder of staff are employed on what we call national joint conditions of service. The rates of which are set nationally. And we're obliged as an organisation that applies those terms and conditions to follow any changes that they agree nationally and negotiate nationally. With the agreement, the cost of living allowance agreement that was reached last year, there was also an agreement to implement a new pay spine that dealt with some of the anomalies that developed in the existing pay spine over years of change. So we're obliged to do that, and we're in the process of implementing that. And Appendix A sets out the new grading structure for those staff. We cannot introduce any detriment as a result of the implementation of that new pay structure, but it also addresses the 2% cost of living allowance. Also, the implementation of the pay spine automatically gives every member of staff a 2% cost of living allowance. So that's the key change for this year. It also introduced a new bottom rate of £9 an hour, which is equivalent to the foundation living wage, a rate that you've all supported every year with the last couple of years with your approval of the pay policy statement. So that's the key change this year. There's also one additional recommendation, and that is to harmonise the subsistence rates of officers with those that are paid currently to members. And those rates are set out in the pay policy statement, section 11, if I remember rightly. And they are the rates that were recommended by the independent remuneration panel last year. So in terms of recommendations, they are that the Council approve the attached pay policy statement as set out in Appendix 1, and also that the Council approve the proposed changes to the subsistence rates for officers as described in paragraph 10.2 of the pay policy statement. Thank you.
Okay, members, any questions or comments? Got Leader first, then Jason.
I'm just coming very quickly to welcome the report, to welcome the decrease in the ratio of senior pay to average pay. I think as a council that strives towards fair pay, then that's something we should welcome. Also, the reduction in management costs with the chief officer post reducing from 33 to 26. Both of those, I think, are good signs of how we're trying to work. I welcome the fact there's been a national pay award for local government workers. I think it's key to emphasise at this point that we're talking about local government workers and not councillors. in this report. This isn't about councillors' pay, that's separate and decided by the IRP. This is about the people who do the work for us, about the staff in our schools, social care, community services, housing, all those sort of things. Those people have seen their pay fall by over 20% in real terms this decade, and I think they're, as I've said before, some of the heroes who keep our local services running. So I welcome that pay award as well, and I think this report shows that we're a council that's trying to do the right thing in terms of fair pay.
Okay, Jason?
Yeah, thank you. I just note that, in particular, the Chief Executive hasn't taken a pay increase since 2008. And I just wanted to put on record the fact that I think that's an outstanding leadership aspect, and she should be commended for demonstrating that she's willing to do that. I think it's a good message to send out.
Members, any other questions or comments on this one? Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just looking at Appendix C, page 373, just on number 2, redundancy and retirement calculations. Just wondering why that's being doubled. Their pay would be doubled. You know, with times of austerity, I just think I might be a little bit excited.
I guess it's a balance for us. It's typical of what's paid at the moment, and I guess it does twofold. You know, we've got to recognise that when people leave us, they're losing their jobs, and they need to be compensated for that adequately. But also, we try and avoid making people compulsory redundant in the organisation as well, so that we try and encourage, when we unfortunately have to make redundancies, try and encourage people to come forward on a voluntary basis. So it adds as a little bit more of an incentive for those people to come forward that are able to go or willing to go, and avoids us having to make people who are redundant that really don't want to go. But it's a matter of judgment, to be truthful, and it's a balancing act. In truth, the cost associated with redundancy isn't massive. It tends to be the massive costs associated with pensions. But in terms of pay, severance pay, as we call it, we don't make a lot of people redundant. So therefore, the significance of the number of weeks calculation that we apply in the great scheme of things isn't huge.
Okay then, can we have somebody to move the recommendations? Second. Thank you. Can I have a show of hands then, those in favour? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, that is approved. So if we can tell everyone who's wandered off, if they're coming back to do it, we'll give them a minute to do that. Okay then, thank you members. If we move on then, agenda item 17, motions on notice, there aren't any, so agenda item 18 is members' question time. Just put my glasses on. Councillor O'Connell, could you ask your first question, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can the leader give members an update on progress made at Cumberland High School over the last month?
Happy to. The Education Department are continuing to work closely with the school and the EAS. We've been assured that the work being undertaken with Cantonian in Cardiff and King Henry VIII School in Monmouthshire is bringing real benefits to the school, and we look forward to seeing the evidence of the impact of this work in the coming weeks and months. Most notably, Essendon have reviewed and accepted the school's post-inspection action plan, which will now be implemented and is available on the school's website. As we have already issued a statutory warning notice to the school prior to them being placed in special measures, we will be formally reviewing the school's progress against the measures we have required them to address. Officers will be discussing this review with the head teacher and chair of governors shortly.
Do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah. When can members, and more importantly parents, expect to see a reassessment and an exit of the special measures classification?
That work is ongoing. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but we're determined to make the change that are needed to make that difference.
Okay, Jason, your second question.
Yeah, there has been a notable rise in far-left and I'll add far-right agitators on social media, with particular hateful and slanderous accusations of racism being unfairly directed at an independent member of the council. Does the leader condemn these unfounded attacks? Does he further disavow these type of actions? And will he formally sanction any member of his party that brings it into disrepute by repeating such hurtful and unfounded accusations against one of the most compassionate and caring members of this council?
I have great respect for anyone who does the job of a councillor, especially at the moment, and I share your concern about the tone of social media debate nationally, on the right and the left. Members can expect to be held to account for their statements and actions in a reasonable way. However, none of us should expect abuse for the job that we do. I condemn any harassment or intimidation of any elected member, whatever their party, and hope Councillor O'Connell will join me in that stance.
Councillor O'Connell, do you have a supplementary?
I do. The reason for the question was because of the rise in what I saw as online hate, and be it far left, far right, I think we all have a part to play. This particular instance of unfounded racism, or unfounded accusations of racism, led to windows being smashed. So it does have real-world consequences. Can I ask the leader then to speak to Gwent Police to make sure that members of this council from all sides are adequately supported by the police when those accusations are reported to them?
I'm happy to speak to Gwent Police. Unfortunately, they've had to contact me recently about threats that I've had to myself, and I'm more than happy to make sure that all members feel protected in the job that we have a right to do. I'm glad he seems to condemn online abuse and intimidation, because I have to say I was rather disappointed to see on the Torvine Conservatives Facebook page recently a post commending the harassment experienced by a local Member of Parliament. I don't believe any councillor or MP, Labour or Tory, should be subjected to that kind of treatment, and I have to say I'm disappointed because it's not the behaviour that I expect from Conservative members of this council, who have always previously been decent and respectful, even when we've had policy disagreements in the past. I hope we can then all draw a line on the kind of vitriol we've seen far too much of across the country in recent times, and that's been infecting our political debate.
Okay, question 3, Councillor.
Madam Chair, I did put my hand up.
You can't take questions during members' questions.
I'm not asking a question of a question. I'm saying that we haven't been issued with these questions, and my eyesight isn't that good that I can read off the board. I did notice that you've had them handing out to you on the podium, and there's members in this room that can't read.
Okay, I would say, didn't it go out? Is it part of the pack online? Can I just ask? Yeah. Okay, so I think it went out if you had it electronically, but it didn't go out paper. So in future, we'll make sure that that's done. Okay. Sorry, Rose. Anyway, question 3 then. Councillor Camp.
Thank you, Chair. At the start of the educational year 2018-19, 60 pupils, children, were registered across Torvine as being home educated. Would Councillor Yole, Executive Member for Education and Lifelong Learning, give a statement regarding what support is currently being given to parents by Torvine County Borough Council to ensure that their child gets a full and meaningful education?
The home education community in Torvine is a diverse population, with families choosing to home educate for a variety of different reasons. Parents who choose to home educate have a duty to fulfil the requirements of Section 7 of the Education Act of 1996 to ensure that their children of compulsory school age receive a suitable and efficient education conducive to their age, aptitude and ability. Torvine's Home Education Officer provides advice and guidance to parents throughout the elective home education process. Thus, initial information and guidance that is provided to parents who might be considering home educating so they can discuss options with a named contact within the authority who is familiar with home education policy and practice and has an understanding of the relevant legislation and a range of educational philosophies. We provide parents with written advice and guidance and offer to meet with or discuss their education plans with the Home Education Officer. Where parents wish to meet, the provision is discussed and, with their agreement, examples of work, planning and provision are observed. Future contact arrangements are agreed if requested. Parents are made aware that they are able to contact the EHE officer at any time for additional meetings or advice and information. We contact all EHE parents at least annually to ask for updated information and to meet with them. When informed that a parent or carer wishes to home educate, the LA gathers information from school, health and social care sources to ensure that there are no concerns about the pupil being home educated. The law states that the LA should assume that efficient educational provision is taking place which is suitable for the child, unless there is evidence to the contrary. There is no provision in the 1996 Act for the LAs to investigate actively whether parents are complying with their duties under Section 7 of the Act. The authority does not have the right to insist on seeing education in the home, and some parents may be uncomfortable in allowing an education officer access to their child or family home. There is no legal definition of full-time education or on the contact time parents must spend on education when it takes place at home. Education can be varied and flexible under the Act. It should be borne in mind that home educating parents do not have to follow the national curriculum or adhere to school hours or terms and do not have to undertake qualifications. Support is also in place for parents who choose for their child to return to school, and the EHE officer supports the admissions process and supports parents with meeting and contact with the new school.
Councillor Kent, do you have a supplementary?
I do. In regarding your response, could you send me an actual hard copy of it, because there's an awful lot of good information there, if possible. In regarding the supplementary, from the support and monitoring that is currently being given by the Council, are home-educated pupils on target?
Well, can I pause? I can't hear. Have you got it?
No problem. If you continue, that might be better. From the support and monitoring that is currently being given by the Council, are home-educated pupils on target to achieve excellent GCSE results for 2018-19?
Well, that's something that I can't comment on here. I will endeavour to get that kind of information and give you a written answer on that as well. But I have to say that the input from the LEA into the process of home education is incredibly limited. Our duties, in a sense, are fulfilled with the notion that we can't interfere in a decision, we can only advise and support after the fact. But what information there is regarding that particular question, I will endeavour to dig out and get to you as soon as possible.
Councillor Kent, second question.
Unfortunately, yet again, Cwmbran High School, which falls in my ward catchment area, has been banded as red in the National School Categorisation System. School educated or home educated, which is the best?
Well, another good question. As members will appreciate, the National Schools Categorisation System's purpose is to identify the level of support the schools need to improve the quality of education that they provide to learners. As has been outlined in previous answers on the school in this chamber, the school is receiving the highest level of support for any of our schools, and the Council has also exercised its statutory powers in relation to the school. We are continuing to actively review the situation in school, and while we note that Estin have recently accepted the school's post-inspection action plan, we are not complacent about the work needed to see the quality of education improve. As outlined in my previous response, we stand ready to support parents and carers who choose to home educate their children. It's not for me to give a hard and fast answer to the question, the sting in the tail, if you like, because in some senses that would be frustrating the principle of parental choice. I can say that if you move in towards this notion that there is one particular reason why people home educate, I think that's far, far from the truth. There are a number of reasons, a variety of different reasons why parents or carers choose to home educate. But I think perhaps the best way to suggest an answer is to look at the number of pupils that we have in our school's remit currently, which is something a little short of 15,000. I think it's 14,937 in total across primary and secondary. And then compare that with the 60 pupils that are currently receiving home education. It's a ratio of 250 to 1, and I think perhaps that goes some way to answering your question.
Councillor Kent, do you have a supplementary?
I do, Chair. And again, I appreciate your answer from my second question. Again, if you could send me a hard copy, that would be great. In regarding the supplementary, I think you've partly answered it, but if you want to expand, that would be good. And my question is, in your position as Executive Member for Education and Lifelong Learning, how are you going to reassure parents that school education is the best way to educate their child as opposed to that of being home educated?
Well, again, and I know that perhaps you're not being mischievous, but that's how it could be read. I've already said that it isn't for us, it isn't for me or anybody else in the education service in Torfaen to dictate or to suggest strongly. Our function with respect to people who choose to home educate is to advise them and support them after the event, not try and encourage them one way or the other before the event. Of course, I believe that our education service is sound, and I believe that that is the best way to go. But of course, there are people who have a different view. There are 60 sets of parents who have a different view. But when you consider again that those in those 60s, and I've had this on very good authority from the EHE officer, that the reasons given for home education are principle, religion, philosophy, and a whole host of other things as well that I could discuss with you afterwards because it's not appropriate to reference them in this chamber. But I stick with the answer that I gave earlier on. It isn't right for me to say which is the best because, in a sense, that fundamentally undermines the principle of parental choice, which must be their choice and their choice alone. They mustn't be influenced by anything that I say, although I am 100% behind the system in supporting them once they've taken that choice.
Okay, Councillor Kent, your third question.
I think at this stage it would be remiss of me not to congratulate, if like, the educational team in the, as far as the primary categorisation for this year, because in regarding the primaries, there's been an increase of primary schools that have gone into the green banding, which again I think we need to celebrate, but there's more work to be done in regarding the comprehensive.
Can I just respond to that?
Hang on, Dave, I'm being told no, you can't, so. So let's just do the questions.
But we've discussed that if you want. In regarding my supplementary, hopefully you're predicted, sorry, the third question, you beg your pardon. What are the predicted 2018-19 GCSE target results for all Torfaen comprehensive schools?
Well, at the risk of an incredibly long answer to the question, because it is contained in this kind of format, and it would take quite a while to But, well, I appreciate that you might appreciate me going on at some length, but the last time I went on at some length, it ended in some negativity, should we say. What I have done is taken the liberty to email, and I think you all should have got a copy of it by now, a copy of this. No, you haven't got it yet? Well, that's unfortunate, because I gave instructions for that to be sent out first thing this morning.
Was it sent?
No, this morning, yeah. Right, well, here we go then. There are 6 secondary schools, yeah. And if I take them, first of all, in terms of level 2 plus, because there's a breakdown here of about 5 or 6 different categories, okay? Level 2 plus, Abersycon, 45.7, Crossy Kellogg, 59.8, Cwmbran High School, 50.9, St Albans, 75%, Westmont, 58.1, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu, 58.2. Level 2, that's any 5 GCSEs, 8C. Level 2 then, 60.4 for Abersycon, Crossy Kellogg 64.5, Cwmbran High School 61.8, St Albans 83.1, Westmont 60.1, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu 74.5. Level 1, which is a different category altogether, outside of GCSEs in that sense, we're talking about 92.1% for Abersycon, Crossy Kellogg 93.4%, Cwmbran High School 98.2%, St Albans 99.3%, Westmont 98.6%, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu 100%. If we start to look at individual subjects that go to make up in part the level 2 plus, English, again Abersycon 50%, Crossy Kellogg 67.6%, Cwmbran High School 61.2%, St Albans 84.6%, Westmont 66.9%, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu 63.6%. Mathematics, Abersycon 56.1%, Crossy Kellogg 63.7%, Cwmbran High School 60%, St Albans 75%, Westmont 66.2%, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu 63%. Mathematics and numeracy, Abersycon 56.1%, Crossy Kellogg 63.7%, Cwmbran High School 60%, St Albans 73.5%, Westmont 66.9%, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu 60%. Science, Abersycon 62.8%, Crossy Kellogg 59.8%, Cwmbran High School 64.8%, St Albans 75%, Westmont 55.4%, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu 65.5%. Cap 9, that's every GCSE has a numerical figure adjacent to it, and the Cap 9 are the best 9 GCSE results aggregated up and given a point score. Abersycon then, the Cap 9, 319.8, Crossy Kellogg, 370.7, Cwmbran High School, 339.3, St Albans, 375.8, Westmont, 317.2, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu, 348. And finally, 5 A stars to A's, Abersycon, 12.2%, Crossy Kellogg, 12.1%, Cwmbran High School 11.5, St Albans 24.3, Westmont 7.4, Ysgol Gyffing Gwynthlu 12.7. If I can pause there, just have a sip. No, you're keen to carry on. Go on.
Okay. Do you have a supplementary?
I do appreciate that, especially for the people watching on the webcast, because they might not necessarily have the document which you read from. And I do have a supplementary, if that's okay. That's fine. Hopefully your predicted target results will not only be met but exceeded, and I do mean that, and I really do mean it. However, should your targets not be met in your position of Executive Member for Education and Lifelong Learning, will you be taking sole or joint responsibility for the outcomes? If jointly, who with?
But I know that the question was asked in the right kind of spirit. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see what occurs. I'm confident that the schools are doing their level best to improve, and certainly the way we interface with those schools leaves no stone unturned. The EAS, who are the commissioned body to oversee and to look after the well-being in that sense of the schools, we have some robust interfaces with them on a fairly frequent level, and they sometimes are incredibly robust as well. We have intervention boards in several of the secondary schools, particularly in some of the primary schools, and I'd like to believe that we are making some headway in that. But all sorts of things can hang in the balance, and I'm not going to hold myself hostage to fortune by giving you any straight yes or no answers here today.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 19 then is the Cabinet decisions. So you have first one in front of you, it's from the 22nd of January. Any questions or comments on those decisions? Okay, and then the second one is from the 19th of Feb. Again, any questions or comments? In that case, then, are we happy to note those decisions? Yeah. Okay, next meeting will be on the 14th of the 5th, here in the Chamber. Other than that, I just want to say thank you very much. It's been quite a long day, but honestly, thank you very much for everyone's contributions. Don't forget to put your cards back on the wall.